Start this meeting of the Planning Commission. It's 5:30. That clock's a little bit slow, but not bad. So if you'll come in and sit down, and I wanted to make one small note to the commission to remind them that we need to be respectful and professional when we're dealing with the applicants. Apparently, there were some things that happened last meeting that got some comments. So if everybody would maintain their demeanor and be professional and respectful of the applicants, we can make this meeting go smoother. So the opening part of the meeting is the open forum. Does anybody have any topics they want to bring up and discuss?
Chair, I would, but I thought that is there a report of the chair and vice chair or the director first before we get to the open forum?
Oh, yeah, it is. Thank you. The chair has nothing to report. Vice chair?
The vice chair has nothing to report.
And Nick, are you there? Does the director have something?
Just some quick updates. So last week, the City Council adopted a couple of ordinances that came through the Planning Commission, one several years ago that modifies and we think improves for everybody the early engagement requirements and public noticing requirements for things that have to go out to our recognized organizations, filling a lot of gaps in that code that were identified actually during an appeal process several years ago. So that was adopted. It doesn't necessarily directly impact the work of the Planning Commission. That's all pre-work that we do at the staff level that many of the applications are required to go through. And then they adopted the downtown building heights and street activation project, which is you saw last fall, I believe, which was a pretty significant code change for this commission. Very complex in how it updates things in multiple different zoning districts to try to implement the downtown plan. So both of those were adopted. They also adopted a petition that related to signs on school district properties. So there's been a lot of confusion over the years about whether school districts have to comply with local zoning, and they do, in fact. And unfortunately, years of precedent of not believing that they did resulted in a lot of non-complying signs. So that proposal cleaned all of that up and fixed all of that moving forward. So it addresses some long-standing issues there. And that is, I think, all I have to report.
Okay, short and sweet tonight. Now, the open forum. Commissioner Gent.
Thank you, Chair Bachman. Yeah, so I wanted to ask a couple questions and then also kind of feel at the commission on something. On administrative matters, and this is Paul, I especially have questions for Paul. We are not required by law to have a public hearing in person on administrative matters. Is that accurate?
Some administrative items, we are not required to have a public hearing on those. The administrative ones can still have a public hearing on that. No, I think we do have to have a public hearing on the admin items.
On all admin items?
On all admin items, yeah. I was thinking we have administrative hearings outside of the Planning Commission on more simple items, but those still have a public hearing.
I have no further comments or questions then.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, then we'll jump right into the agenda. The first item is the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to discuss the consent agenda?
I will make a motion to consider the consent agenda.
Okay, I have a motion by Mike
Second?
and a second by Andra. Now you've got me totally. So I'll call for the roll on that. Commissioner de Oliveira,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Paredes,
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner Gent,
Yes.
Commissioner Carlson?
Christensen. Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
and what's John's last name? Lee, thank you. And Commissioner Lee.
Yes.
They just gave me first names on my list, so. And the chair will also vote yes. So we'll consider the consent agenda. Does anybody want to make any changes in the consent agenda or discuss any of the items on the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Madam Chair, first, because we do have one item on here, you have to open a public hearing for the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I will open the public hearing on the consent agenda. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this item?
And
Are there any emails?
Well, I would maybe suggest announcing what that petition is. So the 29th Ward House conditional use, if there's anybody wishing to speak on that.
Okay, so the second item on the consent agenda is regarding the 29th Ward Meeting House conditional use, adaptive reuse of a landmark building in a residential district. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on that item? Okay, you can go up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Debbie Stone, and I live one house away from the building. I'm worried about parking. If that's used for any other social purposes. Parking in our neighborhood is tough. People from the fairgrounds, when they have events at the fairgrounds, my street, 4th North, is packed with cars, so that if anybody would come to visit anybody, there's no parking for them. And so many people on my street have 4 and 5 cars. They have to park in front of their houses. If that place has too many people and they start parking on the street, it's going to really impede us for parking. So that concerns me.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this? Step up to the podium, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes. Get close so we can hear you.
Thank you. My name is Ted Lewis. I live on the same street as the building in question, on the same block. 25 years ago or so, this building was being used as a refugee center of sorts, and the lady in charge left. She left the state for some other activities, and right away things went downhill. Late, noisy evenings became a problem. You've already heard about the parking. I'll invoke Senate rules and not repeat what's already been said. I have a question about the process. If you make a change in the permitted use of the building, do you have the ability to do so to restrict the hours of use with a readily enforceable approach to stopping the noise and the problems? Is that something any of you can answer?
We'll take that under consideration when we have a discussion, so we can't answer your question right now.
But I'm just asking if you have the ability in whatever you allow to restrict hours.
This is public comment, not public question.
So I can't give you an answer at this point.
I'm not surprised. I hope you'll take it into consideration, those of us who live on that street, like the residential neighborhood. Too much activity starts to change that in a hurry. And as long as the activity doesn't go late into the evening, I don't worry so much about it. I hope you'll take that into consideration.
Thank you. I saw one other hand. If you want to come up, state your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Barbara Ishimatsu, and I own property that's directly next door to the property here. And I also have a concern about parking, but it's the interior parking lot. There are 2 residential homes that are directly facing a lot of activities, and there's headlights. Those headlights go directly into.
Would you
both
get
of
a
the-
little closer to the microphone so we can hear you better?
So when there are activities at the property, the headlights of cars that are parking in the interior parking lot go directly into both of the houses that are next door. So it goes into kitchen, living room, bedroom of one house, and I don't know the layout of the other house, but it's the entire side of that house faces the parking lot. So I'm hoping that you'll require a fencing or some other method to retain the headlights of any cars that are parking in the interior of this property.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak on this item? Okay, I will close the public hearing on the consent agenda. Do we want to make any changes to the consent agenda? Or do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mike, Commissioner Christensen, and a second by Commissioner Gent. Commissioner Lee,
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Shearer,
Yes.
Commissioner Paredes,
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner Gent,
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale,
I will abstain as to the minutes of the former meeting as I was not in attendance, and will vote yes on the second issue.
Thank you. And the chair will do the same since I wasn't at the last meeting. So I will abstain on the consent agenda and vote yes on the second item.
Chairperson Bachman, can I take a point of privilege?
Sure.
Just for those who made some public comment, one of the things that the conditional use process allows that is if a use operates in a manner that creates a nuisance, the city has more ability to address those nuisances through the conditional use process. So things like if some of those things that are described actually do occur, even though they may not be conditions of approval, if they do create that nuisance, the city can work with the applicant and the property owner to address those as nuisances and violations of the conditional use requirements. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. So that's, the consent agenda is approved. So we can move on to the regular agenda. Item number 1 is the alley vacation at approximately 268 West Paxton Avenue. Case number PLN PCM 2022-01128. Katya.
So this is a proposal for an alley vacation. The alley in question to be vacated is the north-south portion, which is seen in a red dashed line. The alley has a L shape, so it has a east-west portion also. Staff recommendation is that the Planning Commission forward a negative recommendation to the City Council. And I will explain why. So this alley was platted in 1890, and in 1960, the very far eastern part of the alley was closed because of the railroad. And so it dead ends right there. The properties surrounding this alley are all commercial and are zoned, except for one single-family home, but it is zoned CG, general commercial. So the applicant is requesting this vacation because of issues with safety and crime, and to make this block a little bit more safe. And I just wanted to show that the access to the alley is pretty much from 300 West now. And not so much from the north-south. One of the big reasons for that is that it's gated. There's a gate between the two property owners who are the applicants, and the gate sort of keep people from accessing the east-west. The photograph here on the right is of the only property that has no access to their off-street parking from Paxton Avenue. So it's accessed from the back of the rear of their property from the alley. And this is a picture of that property, and this is their off-street parking right here. And just wanted to show also that, there is the alley is fenced off beyond that property. Let me show you again where it is fenced off. It's right here. And this is the current access from 300 West that, people who want to access the east-west, come from 300 West, go through this property here on the north and access. So this is, this property here has partially encroaches into the alley because, as you can see, there's parking that is within the alley. This property also is, as you can show here, the petitioners for this alley vacation have worked out with this property owner at 1125 South, 300 West, so that they can have an easement, and the easement is shown on this hatched line here for access to the east-west alley. So one of the key considerations that we're looking into is access, because that is the main reason for an alley, is vehicular access. Right now, the north-south is not being used as an alley per se, because it is being used mostly as, an extension of the parking lot for these two properties abutting it. But there is this property here, which is a very narrow property, which does not have access at all. And their only access would have been, if there was an easement, if the north-south portion of the alley is closed. So out of these properties here, these properties next to the alley, to the east of the alley, these properties are, owned by the petitioner. So they have access from Paxton, and these two properties here, the alley is not used because it is fenced off to them right now, so there's no access to the alley right now. However, these two properties on the, as you can see on the green dashed line here, they do use the alley. This property here, 244, is okay with the alley being vacated as long as there is an easement that officially, keeps, retains their access from the alley. And however, this property, the narrow property here at 240, the property owner is against any closure, even with the easement. The recommendation from our engineering department was not to vacate this portion, the north-south alley. They believe that unless it's 100% vacated, then it should not be vacated at all. Transportation, also has a similar recommendation in that they would like to see if there are any connections from 300 West, that it be officially dedicated to the city as an access, not just as an easement. Police responded saying that, there are safety issues. They're not really opposed to vacating the alley, but recommend putting lighting in, waste removal, and having some sort of public safety plan. So after we review, and we find, the planning staff finds that it does not satisfy the policy considerations, and that even though the applicants have a fair case that they want it to be safer, there's still an issue with the access from 240 Paxton, with no access from Paxton. And also that an easement is a weak way of maintaining that access, that, by vacating a dedicated portion of that alley, which is a very strong way of access, the easement is just weak. So, and also that, we would leave that a big piece of this alley as a landlocked piece of property. So for that reason, we are recommending that the Planning Commission recommend and forward negative recommendation to the City Council.
Okay, is your applicant here? Does he
We've
have-
talked to them and emailed them, but I haven't.
Well, he raised his hand. Are you, okay, why don't you come up next to Katya?
Madam Chair, may I ask that the doors be closed, because there is a ton of noise in the hallway that is making it extremely
Sure.
difficult for me to concentrate on what Ms. Pace is saying. Thank you.
Good evening.
You need to get close to the microphone,
Is that better? Okay, great.
so you'll have 10 minutes to make your case, and then we'll ask questions.
Okay, wonderful. Great, I appreciate your time tonight. I want to address just a few quick points for you. My client and his family have owned this piece of property
And you are?
I'm Ryan Merriman. I'm
Okay.
the attorney for the applicant, RCB Rental Properties.
Okay, thank you.
They've owned the property for almost 40 years, and so they're well aware of how this north-south alleyway has been used since they've owned the property. During that time period, as we pointed out in our petition, they're unaware of anyone ever utilizing the north-south section of the alleyway to access those properties in the back. And one of the reasons they're unaware of anyone using that is for a significant portion of time when they bought the first piece of property, there was a fence along the eastern edge of the property on the corner between them and the alleyway. And there were people urban camping along the fence and obstructing that whole area. And eventually they acquired the property east of that. And when that happened, they took down the fence, paved it. There was not a gate there until 2020. So I don't know if that was clear from the staff report. No gates until 2020. And so during that time period where there were no gates, they just weren't aware, seeing anybody use that north-south section of the alleyway to get back there. They suspect that people have always been accessing it through 300 West during this entire time period. But as I mentioned, in 2020, when the urban camping became a more severe problem, that's when they installed the gate back there to try to ameliorate some of that. There's a lot of crime in the area. They had some problems with that, and that's why they put the gate. Once city compliance contacted them, they opened the gate. They've left it open and will leave it open unless we can resolve through the process here with the city. What we're asking here is a practical solution to a real challenge. We just need to figure out a way to ensure that everyone has sufficient access while also promoting the safety in the area. Nobody should have to feel like they can't access their business because there's urban camping. Nobody should feel like they're unsafe when they go to their business or to their home, but people should also be able to have access to their property. And we believe that we've proposed a solution that accommodates these competing interests. And I'll tell you why. I want to address just a couple of the factors that have gone over in the staff report. One of these is the police, fire, transportation recommendations. What it says in the staff report is that They're not recommending approval because, and I just want to make sure I got the language right, that even though widening and moving the access to the alley improves the current and possible future use of the alley, an easement for access is insufficient. And I disagree with that. I have a Utah Supreme Court case that's cited a lot for this proposition from 2001. I have copies for everybody that I can pass out. This was authored by Justice Durham before she retired from the bench. And what it says in paragraph 19 is one citizen has no entitlement to another citizen's property or a right to obstruct another citizen's easement. It is a long-held tenet of property law that a servient estate cannot unreasonably restrict use of the easement. And so in layman's terms, what that means is that if the northern property owner, once that easement is granted, if they tried to obstruct it, that would be an illegal trespass. It would be illegal for them to obstruct the easement. And so it's hard for me to understand how giving that access through this easement is somehow inferior to what we have already. And that's evident when you look in the staff report at the proposed easement. The alleyway as it stands right now, north-south, is 12 feet wide. That's not very wide. Try to get 2 cars in and out on 12 feet. The proposed easement that we're proposing is 25 feet wide, more than twice as wide. And it tracks the area that people are actually using for access on the ground and have been for decades. They're going from 300 West to access this easement. When my clients put the gate up in 2020, no one knocked on the door and said, what gives? We can't access our alley, because they weren't using the north-south portion. They were coming from 300 West through that parking lot to the east-west. And so we think that a lot of these objections in the staff report are based on this premise that an easement is insufficient to protect the access rights of this property owner on 240 Paxton Avenue. And we disagree with that for the reasons I've suggested. I'd also like to point out that if you look on page 37 of the staff report, this is the objection from the owner at 240. I'll just note for the record that I had a hard time getting in contact with him. I wanted to sit down and talk about the easement with him, and I was never able to do that. The date of his email is February 10th, 2023. We didn't propose the easement until March. And so I don't know if he was ever even informed. Maybe he's here today and he'll put me in my place and say, no, I disagree anyway. But I don't know if he was informed about the availability of this easement. I think his objection was, hey, wait a minute, guys. If you close this down, I can't access my parking. But if he has an easement, he can absolutely access his parking the same way that he's been accessing it for the last 30 or 35 years. And so I think that addresses most of the things in the staff report. It wouldn't, because you have an easement, it doesn't leave the east-west portion landlocked because there's an easement to access it. It doesn't eliminate his ability to use his off-street parking, and it wouldn't result in the alleyway being used in a way that's contrary to city policy. In sum, we think that this is a very practical solution that can help minimize crime in the area, but will also promote access for everybody that uses that alleyway. The last point that I would make is I think there was a suggestion somewhere in the staff report that the owners to the north might block off the easement unless there was a dedicated alleyway to the road. We have a dedicated alleyway in the back on the east-west portion, and what happened? He put a fence up and he's currently obstructing it. Now that's illegal. It's also illegal to obstruct a private easement. And so having an easement versus a dedicated public alleyway doesn't really prevent people from breaking the law. But you still have you have really strong rights as a property owner once you have that access easement, as it says in this case, that if someone obstructs it, that's a trespass, and you can get an injunction and they can't obstruct it. I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Katja, do you want to come back up? And questions, concerns from the commission?
If I can, it's a very clear presentation, but I think I just want to make sure I understand, because the satellite imagery, which is also in our staff report, so this guy's coming in off Paxton, the guy in number 7, so the concerning guy that says he's going to lose, and he's driving across these lawns because it looks like parcel 6 has grass that he's driving across? No.
Well,
Okay, I'm misunderstanding.
A picture.
I think those may be trees, but I'm not 100% certain.
Yeah. So this is the alley. This is the alley here on the north, behind his property. And from this point right here, it's gravel. This is gravel here.
Okay, so this person would now have to access it off 300. They could still access their off-street parking, but only off 300 West. Is that correct?
That's
Actually,
what they already do. Yeah.
they have been accessing from 300 West, but they still have the option of accessing from Paxton, from this.
By driving across all these properties in between, by driving across property 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So, because we're going to keep the yellow portion, right?
Yeah, the yellow.
It's the yellow-red portion that is in
Yellow
question.
is the east-west, and it would remain open.
Yes.
It would be just this north-south
Yes.
portion.
So
that would be
right
closed.
now, the concern that this person would lose is that they can't, because they clearly can't directly access 7 from the north-south, right? They have to be driving across these other parcels.
Well, right now, there's gates here, so it's open during the day, but, when the business closes, the gates are closed. Let me show you a picture of that. So here's, an example of the alley being closed from Paxton. This gate here is located right here. So right now, property number 7 uses 300 West, but without an easement, if this property owner decides to close it off, they lose access.
Okay, so they theoretically, so I think I understand what you're saying. The yellow immediately above the yellow-red, the property owner does have the right to put a fence there to prevent access to the rest of that alley?
I'm not sure I understood your question. So you mean the gate right here and right here?
Sorry, can you point that out again? I was looking at my...
A gate right here?
Yeah?
Yeah, there is a gate right here, right now. So, when it's closed, that gate is closed. When the business closes, then there is no access, from the north-south.
But so I think I think I understand now. Right now, during certain times when that gate is not closed, they have the ability to access the east-west portion of the alley through either 300 West
Right.
or Paxton.
Right.
And if we vacate the alley, they would have to go through 300 West. They would no longer have the option to go through Paxton. Is that accurate?
May I add one piece to that, Commissioner Gant? There is not legal access for this property from 300 West. That parking lot is private property. There is no easement or public dedication of any property that would give this owner legal access off of 300 West. And so if this alley, which is currently a city-dedicated property, were vacated, and if, for example, the petitioner decided not to grant the easement once that was vacated, then it would leave this owner without any legal access to their off-street parking, correct?
Correct.
And if I can clarify just really quickly, our petition is premised on that easement being granted. In other
Meaning
words,
it's signed and ready to record, or what is your proposal for that?
our proposal is that easement is granted and in effect as an express condition of our petition being approved. We've already drafted the easement. We can't get people to sign it, of course, until they know what's going to happen with the city council. But we're not asking anybody to close down that north-south portion of the alleyway if the easement is not in place.
So if I may, you certainly can get the easement signed and held in escrow until the conditions of being able to record it are met, according to the owner and the beneficiary of that easement.
Absolutely.
And
we
so
can.
that certainly can be signed and placed in escrow pending the council's vacation of the alleyway.
We can absolutely do that.
And then that, I mean, at that point, the recordation and effectiveness of that easement is nearly guaranteed.
Yes, we're happy to do that.
Have you presented the easement to the Planning Commission or to anyone else to review the terms?
We have presented the legal description of the easement and a survey depicting the easement. We've given that to the commission. It's in the record.
Have you expressly outlined the terms of the easement and maintenance obligations for each of the owners?
We haven't yet, but we can certainly do that.
Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
There's a bigger problem here, and that is that this alley was not dedicated to the owners of the abutting property. It was dedicated to the public. So the entire public, as impractical as it may seem, has the right to access this alley as it exists now. If the ability to access it off of Paxton were removed, then the public at large no longer has access or has the right to access that alley unless that easement is granted to the entire public, which is essentially going to be a dedication, which I don't think the city's going to want through somebody's parking lot.
And I guess if I can respond to that, the only person that is objected to this petition is someone who owns a single-family home that uses that for his off-street parking in the back. If he has an ingress-egress easement, he can access it. Invitees, guests to his property can access it. We don't have like a commercial space back there where we have a lot of people in the public that are going back there to access it.
If I may, that individual who has a single-family residence has property rights that are just as effective and just as strong as any commercial owner in the area.
Of course.
So I would hesitate to dismiss that he is the only one that is objected, where he is the one that will not have access to his or she, where they are not the ones who will have otherwise have access to their property. It certainly makes sense that they would object, and I would be cautious about dismissing their rights in this instance.
And I hope I didn't come across as suggesting that I'm being dismissive of their rights. That's why we want the easement in place, because we want him to have access to his property. That's an important concern that we want to make sure we address.
Chairperson, I have a question.
Certainly.
Maybe this is for staff or city attorney. When someone puts a gate up to obstruct an alleyway, like is done right now, whose like enforcement does that fall in? Is that for to get that gate removed? Can you be a property owner? Do you need to be the city? Who?
It's the city's alley, so it's the city's obligation to enforce the. It's hard to say necessity, but it's the obligation to keep public rights of way open.
Okay, so that the current situation is that although there's no, you guys don't remember anybody objecting to that, it's illegally blocked right now by a gate.
Can I clarify quickly? The gates are open. When compliance contacted us about this, we've opened the gates.
Okay.
And we've committed to keep the gates open until we're able to figure out what the
2
city's
years
gonna
they
do.
were closed at night.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The other, if
Or are
there's,
you talking about the other blocked part of the alley?
well, so if, no, I mean, there's a train there. It's totally blocked.
I guess there
no,
is.
but but on the other side of this little house, there's also someone who's blocked the alley there.
Oh,
Yeah, the owner who has objected to our petition is the one that's obstructing the rest of the alleyway with the fence.
is that, oh, with that fence right there? Okay, that's not your fence, but yeah, it is obstructed. What about if there's an easement, does that specific property need to be listed as like a beneficiary for the rest of forever so it doesn't get cut off? And then who's in charge of, if the property owner who owns the parking lot that everyone has been driving through and wants to drive through in the future, if they block that, who's in charge of enforcing that? Does the property owner at 240 Paxton have to sue them, or?
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
So there are a couple different types of easements. There's easements that can run to a specific person, and then there's easements that run with the land. And that means that when the land changes hands, the easement attaches to the land, and it attaches to the land forever. And that's the type of easement that we would be granting here. So even if the owners of that north piece moved away, the easement has been granted, it's on record, and it exists no matter how many times that property changes hands. It's called running, the easement runs with the land.
Okay.
As far as who would enforce it, if someone obstructs the easement, any private property owner has a right to either move the obstruction, or they can obviously file a lawsuit, get an injunction. For practical purposes here, that parking lot has been open without an easement for 30 or 40 years. It's never been closed off. There's never been a problem. In fact, the owners back there have probably acquired prescriptive easement rights. You'd have to litigate that. But if you are using something for access for a long enough period of time, as a matter of law, you acquire prescriptive easement rights. And so right now, it's even debatable that if someone tried to shut that off, you could maybe establish a prescriptive easement. But we want to clean that all up and have an express granted easement in there. But to respond to your question, yes, it would be the private property owners that would enforce the easement.
So the way that I see the city code, you have to meet some objectives, and one of them is improving safety and that kind of stuff, which the planning department agrees that you do. But then there are also requirements that you have to meet, those 8 requirements, and that means no objection by the police department, or fire department, or transportation, which you do have objection to, that the entire alley needs to be vacated, which is not part of this request, and that access, that it doesn't block off access for someone else's property. So I don't think that you meet those 3 considerations, those 3 requirements. Also, if there's a way, like if you get prescriptive easement, maybe do that. I don't know that has a like our role is to say these are what the requirements are, and you don't meet all of those requirements. That's what I feel like. Whereas if you get a prescriptive easement or not, that's a separate issue. And maybe if that's possible, that's a...
Can I respond briefly? Is that okay?
Briefly, please.
Yeah, so those 8 factors, you don't have to meet every single one of the 8 for it to be approved. Those are factors that you consider. For the recommendations, it says that that there's no reasonable objection to it. And the objection that has been made is that this will landlock the parcel, this will cut off access, that the easement is an inferior access. And just based on the legal precedent here, the easement, I think, addresses all those concerns. And so I think you can look at the 8 factors, and with the requirement that the easement be granted, I think you can address everything that's been objected to.
Thank you. How about, are there any other quick questions from the commission? Okay, we'll open, you can stay right there. We'll open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this item? Come up to the podium and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Yeah, my name is James Yates. I'm the owner of that house. So,
would you get closer to the microphone, please?
I was fine with if that easement on 3rd West is like permanently granted. I'm fine with them getting that alleyway. But I need to know that that's like a permanent easement, that, you know, if that company sells, that it doesn't get blocked. Another issue I would just raise with that alleyway in general,
Again, get down closer to the mic, sorry.
Sorry, I'm just short. I guess I'm tall. Is that the L-shaped thing, there's not really much danger going on there. It's the whole alleyway, because I used to have a fence We got a letter, so we took it down. So now that's all open. There's a fence from the owners next to me, but like having that whole alleyway open is just, I mean, that is a sketchy place where, you know, I mean, there's no reason to be back there. And so, I mean, giving them that L shape doesn't really address that issue of, you know, people camping out there. There's been fires back there. There's, you know, looting. I've had my house broken into a couple times from the back. So, you know, it would be nice once if I could put that fence back up, we had a way to open it up. But yeah, I just want access to my property. So if they can get the easement, I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this item? Okay, step up to the microphone and state your name for the record. And you'll have 2 minutes.
My name is Phil Gibbons, and I am co-owner of the building to the north, Intermountain Electric. We are the access from the third west to the alleyway. This does move, thanks.
There you go, pick it up.
In the past, and your name is? James, okay. In the past, we've had problems. We've been in this location since 1974. And we've had problems back here by the railroad where transients have cut through the fences and have set up homeless camps. And like James was saying, they build fires. There were dead raccoons back there. There was all sorts of stuff going on. Me and my partner, Kevin, we are the ones that put the gate up between here because we was having such a problem with transient activity and crime stuff going on, broken needles, all sorts of stuff. We worked with James about talking about putting the gate up, which we gave him the combination of the lock. He was able to access his stuff. The city told us to tear the gate down, and we took it down. And in the meantime, this alleyway is not an alleyway. It's full of cars. It's full of motorhomes. I believe this property right in here has a fence across it. This one used to have a fence across it. When they were there, they've sold out to some apartment complexes and stuff. But it's been nothing but problems back there. Since 1974, we realized that this part here was an easement from the city, but it was left dirt for a long time, and it just kind of made a mess of our parking lot. Every time it rained, people would drive on it and drag that mud through our parking lot stuff. So we opted at the time we redid the parking lot that we would just fill that in with asphalt, make it nice and presentable. We have talked to Ryan with Little Garage. Evidently, he's talked to the people along the street also about an entry here off of 3rd West coming up and dropping into this alleyway here.
Okay, that's your time. Thank you. I think we understand.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this? Step right up. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
So my name is Ryan Bushman. I'm the owner of Little Garage. So I own the properties that we've been talking about that are gated. So we've been there since the 80s. That did not have gates on it up until it was actually 2021 is when the gates went up after we secured the properties to the east. We had talked about with the previous owner of the property to the east of us putting gates up because of the transients going in there. So it is a problem. The camping is a problem. That's why we did it. Realistically, if we take those gates down and we gate off the sides like we legally can, there won't be enough access to get through that easement and make a 90-degree turn to access the north-south. There is a power pole that sits in that easement that does not allow for much traffic to go through there. There's actually more access with my gates open because I gated it bigger than the easement actually is. So if I take and redo my fence right on that easement, it will actually change the access. We have worked, as you can hear, we have worked as surrounding property owners for a long time with no problems. What happened is the city got involved because of a fire in the back, and they made us take gates down. They made us comply, which has actually caused more problems than it's helped. We, as property owners, have all been neighboring owners for a long time. I'm a second generation of my dad, but we are happy to grant access. We are happy to do things the right way. I'm happy to give keys to my gates so that they can get through. I just don't want the homeless people living in between my two properties so that we can have that problem solved. I don't see a problem with working with each other together, but we have a proposal to make it legal and proper.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Discussion?
Madam Chair, can I ask you a question of the applicant? Has there been consideration of vacating the entirety of that alley? And why wasn't that part of the application?
We thought about that. We didn't know if all the property owners to the east would be okay with that. When we filed the application, we weren't aware of how it was being used. As the process has played out, it seems like that may have been something that warranted a little more consideration. This solves one problem. If you solve this problem, there sounds like there's still some public safety issues in the back.
Sure. I think that if there was consideration and if you did that additional legwork to vacate the entirety of it and then put an easement in place to guarantee the cross-access, then it fully becomes a private easement and the city has no role in that whatsoever. And that may make this a more straightforward proposal.
Chairperson Bachman, may I make some comments?
1 second here. You were...
Yeah, I guess Mr. Bushman was just reminding me that in the beginning, that he's come to realize that a lot of the owners back there would like to vacate the whole thing. But when we initially filed the petition, we weren't aware that was going to be feasible, that we could get all of them to agree.
Would you be willing to go back and try to get that in writing and then come back to the Planning Commission at a later date to try to address the entirety of the alley versus just this segment?
I need to talk to my client, but I think that's certainly something that we'd be willing to consider. Yeah, we'd definitely be willing to do that if that would increase our chances of solving all these issues.
I think that for the rest of the commission, I think that's something that maybe you should consider.
So would...
Just a question for staff, should we table this? Do you feel like...
Tabling it, yeah. Would tabling it be appropriate?
If the applicant's willing to do that work, then that would be an appropriate action. If it sounds like they're in agreement to at least try to do that. If they don't, then we come back regardless and go from there.
Should we keep the public hearing open or close it?
I would hate for the applicant to go to all this trouble and then have the Planning Commission and City Council not approve, or I mean, you're asking them to provide a different kind of petition. So, you know, maybe they're willing to do it, but we can't guarantee that that would have more success than this.
Commissioner Scheer, perhaps, I understand exactly what you're saying. Perhaps we could take a straw poll of the commission regarding how we would feel about this that would be not binding, but just get a sense so that the applicant might feel comfortable with this course of action?
Well, I can tell you, I, for one, would not be in favor of vacating the entire alley because I think it would be very short-sighted. This is an area that's under constant redevelopment at this point. But the fact that it's been this way for 40 years almost has nothing to do with anything. And leaving the city's options open for having a connection through there, I think is very realistic. I'm sympathetic to the difficulties that the applicants are having. I'm very I admire greatly their ability to come together and bring this to us. But I think that in the long run, the city needs these connections across these large blocks. And there's already one here, and if it's vacated totally, then it might be a lot harder to get that kind of connection later when you need to service, for example, a housing development or anything else that might go in here. So we're seeing this is an area, if you back out just a little bit, you'll see, this is across the street from Target. There's a bunch of stuff going up just north of there that we've approved already. That's why I would not be in favor of that particular solution.
Thank you. Commissioner Gale?
Thank you. I want to first acknowledge the concern over these safety issues. I know it's difficult, and no one who is a property owner wants to try and deal with broken needles and crime and burning fires and dead animals behind their property. So I think that is something that we can all relate to and understand and want to certainly validate and express that that is definitely a concern and a safety concern. I think this is a difficult proposition for several reasons. The first, and I just want to be clear about all of these things, there is no legal access to this home property from 300 West. The chances of having, in my opinion, the chances of having a prescriptive easement declared over that private property are extremely slim. Further, having a prescriptive easement declared would require the homeowner to take the matter to court and invest in significant legal fees. The matter could be contested by whomever was the owner of the parking lot at the time, and that would increase those legal fees that would be borne by this individual homeowner. There are several steps that have to be taken here before an easement could even be recorded or effective. Once the alley is vacated, and staff and council, feel free to interrupt me if I get anything on this wrong, but once the alley is vacated, there would have to be a purchase and sale agreement entered into for that area to be sold to the neighboring homeowners. Right now, or property owners. Right now, it sounds like the applicant is the only owner interested in purchasing that, but that may not stay the same. Property may change hands, property owners may change minds, there could be a requirement to take bids. The process could be quite lengthy, and by the time it's finished, there's no guarantee that the easement could even be put in place. The strongest guarantee that I think could be accomplished is what I mentioned earlier, which is having a signed easement in escrow that would be automatically recorded upon certain conditions being met, but there are several steps that would have to happen before that actually occurred. During which, quite frankly, this homeowner would not have any legal access to their property if the alley had at that point been vacated. There is a difference between the enforcement of a private easement and the enforcement of a public right-of-way. If you are you certainly can enforce a public easement, but again, if you try to enforce it and the property owner is not amenable to that enforcement effort against them. And I also want to point out, I'm not trying to say that any of these folks we've heard from today would take these kinds of actions. I am looking at long-term because these actions affect the property, as counsel for the applicant said, in perpetuity, right? They'll run with the land. So enforcement of an easement, again, will require court action, and the individual owning that property will have to pay the legal fees for that. Where it's a public right-of-way, they can now use the city muscle, essentially, to enforce their access and to ensure that they have access to their property. So that is a significant change in how that property owner would be able to ensure their own access. And I think I do agree that I think we've heard a number of comments today that might suggest a different kind of petition could be more successful, but it's going to require these property owners to come together and work with folks who are advising all of them as to all of their rights to help them come to an agreement that's going to ensure that that parcel of property, so long as it is an individual parcel that is owned by an individual property owner or an entity that is the property owner, continues to have legal access. I don't think it's in any of our interests, and no one in the city wants to take action that potentially will limit somebody's legal access to their property or make it more difficult for that owner to enforce access to their property unless we already have some kind of documentation that the property owner themselves has decided to enter into some kind of agreement to do that. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I guess I would just put in my 2 cents, which is I think a lot of that could be handled with a condition that there would be an easement in place before it's vacated. And then all those factors would be taken care of during that process. I'm for alleys when they go somewhere. I'm not for alleys when they go to nowhere and there's a train track, which most likely will permanently block this alleyway. We require mid-block walkways when we do big developments, so there is a chance to come back with an alleyway that would work for a bigger development. And for me, it's creating these nuisance properties that nobody takes care of. Just doesn't make sense to me when it doesn't serve a purpose and it goes to nowhere. So it's just creating more problems than it's solving, and more problems than it would even solve in the future, because creating a larger development, you're going to want to change where the alley is anyway for a mid-block walkway. So that's my opinion. I think all this can be addressed through the standards that we have in front of us, and that's part of our role here, is to make these types of decisions. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
So I just want to reiterate, an easement cannot be granted or created or recorded until the vacation is complete and the property has been purchased by someone else.
We could grant the easement tomorrow. I mean, not
Pardon me,
tomorrow.
but you cannot grant the easement tomorrow because the property is a public right-of-way, correct?
No, we can grant the easement from 300 West to the edge of
Okay,
the alleyway.
but that's not part of the proposal here, correct?
The proposal here is that before you vacate the alley, the easement is in place. I just want to be as clear about that as I can.
And you can do that.
And we can do that.
Yeah.
Before they vacate it, we have the easement in place.
So the complicating discussion here is whether to ask them to go back and look at vacating the larger alley piece.
Will you bring up the picture of the easement? So I probably misunderstood, because I believed from the plat showing the easement that you were granting a wider easement down below. Okay, I see. So you're proposing to grant the easement across the parking lot.
Yes, we are.
Okay, so yes, I take that back. They can certainly grant that before the other part is vacated.
Madam Chair, can I get clarification on something? As I'm looking through the staff report and looking at this easement, that appears to be on the KPR property. And looking at page 4 of the staff report, it indicates what the various interests are here. The petitioner is the owner of parcels 1 through 5.
Right.
And that easement would be across parcel 10.
Yeah.
Which is not, it's not yours. So clarify, KPR has agreed to an easement?
Yes, they have.
Right there.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they're here if they can address that.
Just making sure, I didn't, keeping track of everybody. Okay, thanks.
I feel like maybe I think if we table it and they consider vacating the entire alley, do they get to keep their place in line, and Katya's still working on it, and most of the report's already written, and it just changes the consideration of, is that true if we table it? Is that
They're conferring down there.
they're talking about it?
I think we make a motion to that effect, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my understanding of how things get on my agenda, and staff can clarify, is it sort of depends on priorities for the city. And it's very hard to say what is going to come to planning staff and how important things. There could be something more important. There could be a bunch of really unimportant things. Sorry, maybe that's not pressing, maybe is a better term. But I think it's very hard to predict when it would come before us again.
So
Well, we don't know how long it'll take them to get all their
My 2 cents
pieces
is that
together either.
I would vote against the vacation of that part of the alleyway because of those 3 considerations it doesn't meet. But if the requests change, then I might vote for it. Like, you might have solved the problems that are with just vacating part of an alley. that's what I feel like. If we vote right now and give a recommendation or for or against, then the city council votes on that, and then can they ask again for a different full alley vacation?
The city council can, but it would be a different application that would have a different notice radius, potentially.
Yeah.
Might have to go back through, which I think it might have to anyways. But if you get to the city council and they say, no, we want you to vacate the whole thing, then it's coming back here, which means it's going back to the community councils for early engagement and everything else. So, I can't say how the city council might feel about this, but I'm guessing they would have concern about creating an island of an alley.
Yeah. I think what would get me over the hump on this is if the property owner of that single-family dwelling joined in a petition to make this happen.
I mean, he just said he was fine with it. You heard him.
That's not the same as joining in a petition. So I just think if we had formal agreement from that homeowner, that might get me over the hump on this one.
I'm sure he would. I can talk to him about sending you a letter or anything if you think that would be helpful. I'd love to do that.
So before you leave the meeting, get his contact information.
Of course.
I think I'm going to make a motion to table.
Okay.
You can nod. Yeah, okay. I'm going to do it.
Commissioner Burrows, I am concerned about Brenda's sort of wasted effort here. Can we take a straw poll about, so what is your expectation with tabling? What information do we?
Why don't you hear the motion?
All right.
Commissioner Burrows, go ahead.
Yeah.
You can do it.
I'm going to say more information is requested from applicant. Applicant has requested more time to make changes to the proposal. So I move that the Planning Commission table this item to a later date to be determined by staff to address the
Concerns.
the issues on which this doesn't meet the standard.
I'll second that.
I would,
Okay.
friendly amendment, can we keep the public hearing open so that people can discuss the changes?
I
We've
accept
already
that friendly
closed it. Can we,
Oh,
what can we do?
You can reopen it. You can reopen it by motion, by this motion. It would be a motion to table and to reopen the public hearing when it comes back.
Okay.
that, I would accept that amendment to my motion. Thank you.
Okay.
Make one other friendly amendment. I don't believe the applicant has formally asked to bring back additional information. I believe we've asked for more information and made some suggestions, but I don't believe they've asked. So I would just remove that from the motion.
Right, so more information is requested from applicant. I move that the Planning Commission table this item to a later date to be determined by staff, and the public hearing can be reopened at that time. That's my motion for reals.
I second.
Okay. Who was the second?
I was.
Commissioner Gale? Okay. So we have a motion by Commissioner Burrows and a second by Commissioner Gale. Where did I lose her there? There, okay. Commissioner, did somebody say something? No, okay. Commissioner Lee?
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira?
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle?
Yes.
Commissioner Shearer?
No.
Commissioner Paredes?
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner Gent?
No.
Commissioner Christensen?
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows?
Yes.
Commissioner Gale?
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 yeses and 2 noes. You've been officially tabled, so come back with something great for us.
I'll do my best. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Okay, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. A planned development and preliminary subdivision for Muse Townhomes at approximately 720 and 724 South, 300 East. Case numbers PLN PCM 2023-00200 and PLN SUB 2023-00254. Katie Lynn, welcome.
Thank you. Here to present on that planned development, Muse Townhomes and
I need you to get close to the microphone.
All right, so the project location for this development is located at 720 and 724 South 300 East. This is in the RMF 35 zone in the Central Community Master Plan and Community Council. These are 2 lots that equal 0.41 acres. This is located, like I said, in the central city, right along this protected bike lane on 300 East and 0.6 miles away from the library track stop. This project is proposing 7 townhome-style dwelling units on these 0.41 acres. This is their configuration to have 3 separate buildings comprised of 2 single-family homes, 2 sets of twin homes, and 3 single-family attached. There's a private drive that allows 1 driveway down the middle and private garages with 2 parking stalls per dwelling unit. Each unit will have 3 bedrooms and 4 baths. As you can see here, this is a rendering from 300 East. The 2 front buildings are shown to be facing the 300 East facade with a common court out front as a shared private yard. The pedestrian accesses for the front units will be facing the street as well as the balconies and the facades. So it gives a nice street presence along with this common court area in front. I forgot to mention that each of these townhomes will be on their own lot. So that's why this is a preliminary subdivision. So in these private lots, each unit will have their own private patio and backyard that's enclosed by a privacy wall, and all of the vehicle and pedestrian and bike access will be through this private drive that's shared amongst the project, with these garages kind of tucked into the development. Given that this is a planned development, they are requesting a few modifications from zoning. As you can see from this preliminary plat, these back units do not have any frontage on a public street. There's only access through this shared common drive. And then all of these units do not meet any of the standards that are typical for their housing type in the RMF 35 zone. So everything kind of from minimum lot area to width and building coverage are all adjusted so that this configuration can have it happen for this project. So the applicant actually made a very good visual that shows what can be developed with current zoning in the RMF 35 zone, and that with these tweaks to the zoning that they've requested, what they would like to build. So in a typical multifamily development in the RMF 35 zone, typically there's 1 large building with 7 small units, with these setbacks as shown, with 20 in the front and the back and then 10 on the side. But they wanted to build larger, more family style homes and not these small apartment complexes with smaller units. And so they have been creative in configuring the lot this way because other configurations of townhomes do not meet fire code because they need a 150-foot lane from the curb. So in this configuration that they've proposed, there's 3 different buildings, each with their own townhomes that also provides for private lots in the back, but has the same setbacks as a multifamily building. So it has the 10 on the sides, 20 in the back and the front. So it's still giving that space around the neighboring properties that allows for buffering and screening, but it allows for larger units and private ownership. So these are, like I said, family-sized dwelling units and have private amenity space. So because of these adjustments in zoning, you're getting the same amount of dwelling units, but what staff feels is a more enhanced product for this area. So they do have to meet the plan development objectives in order to go through this process. And so this project does meet the master plan compatibility objective. The Central Community Master Plan does state that it would like to maintain that moderate density housing in this area. And this project is 17 units an acre. And the Central Community Plan also desires for more 3 and 4 bedroom housing for this area in order to meet those needs of families. So this project does comply with both of those things by providing these large family style units, but within a moderate density housing style. So going through the plan development standards, like I said in the previous slide, this does meet master plan compatibility. When looking at the design and compatibility of the project as a whole, it certainly meets the design of the surrounding areas in terms of architecture, and there are plenty of other examples of townhomes in this area that it's compatible with. The landscaping, I showed you renderings of that common front yard along 300 East, and then there are plenty of shrubbery and trees along the perimeter that provides adequate landscaping for buffering and screening around the site. For the mobility standard, this project is located on major bike lanes, is located close to public transit, and provides vehicle, bike parking, and pedestrian accesses through the street. There are no prominent existing site features, and there are adequate utilities on the site, so those were not of major concern to staff. So given the standards and the proposal, staff has found that this is recommending approval of this project.
Thank you. Is your applicant here?
They are.
Would you guys like to come up, or one of you, or? We try to hold the questions till you're done, because sometimes you answer the questions. Do you have a presentation, or?
Yes. My name is Bogart McAvoy. I'm the property owner and developer, and this is on Eric from the team of Process Studio Architects.
Okay. You'll have 10 minutes. Make your presentation.
Okay. As Cassie kind of pointed out, we looked at what was possible within the zoning, our understanding and interpretation thereof, and through kind of an iterative process looked at how we felt like we could develop the best product, again, developing something that really accommodated medium to larger families, fit into sort of the general area, and also really we were hoping to provide some private space behind or wherever they could really fit, but it ended up kind of being on the backside and kind of using the setbacks as that area to provide private space, but then we also have a nice amount of public plaza, that sort of thing. And so, let's see, there we go. This kind of shows the site in general. You can kind of see the stars are where there's other projects nearby that sort of fit a similar typology. So we'll kind of go through those. These are some street views of the existing buildings. The upper right photo is the Coco Kitchen, which is a former restaurant that is burned down and is kind of in that state currently. And then the upper left photo is the buildings that I currently own. The small yellow one is a house that we remodeled and is currently inhabited. The other building was not really salvageable and has really just kind of remained basically unused. And then the lower left, you can see there's a large development there, 5 buildings that were built and then sold. The small house in the photo has since been demolished, and they're building, it's the same developer, and they're building the exact same building, sort of a mirror image. And then the lower right photo is the Park Place apartments across the street, and that fills most of the block, and I believe is at least 200 units that I know of. So. And then these are some other projects in the area that we sort of highlighted, kind of showing similar typologies, also just sort of the row type homes. I think D is kind of a nice example of something that's pretty similar, sort of more of a townhouse style where it's all one development, but separate buildings along the way. And then there's the image that we kind of saw before, showing what was possible in terms of square footage, things like that. And again, Cassie really, I think, did a great job of explaining why we chose to propose this particular project. Again, that's from 3rd East looking to the west. So this would be what would be facing the street. And let's see. And then that's a little bit more of a detailed shot, and you can kind of see where each unit gets a nice backyard space and a patio and that sort of thing. And they're using kind of a central, a central driveway for vehicle access, bicycles, that sort of thing. And then there are sidewalks to the north and south to help folks pedestrian access each of their units. And then there's just sort of a rendering detail shot of that sort of front private area, the landscaping, an interior shot of the little driveway area there, and just a couple more renderings of sort of what kind of give you a feel for what the scale and size of the buildings would be. And then I don't know if you want to add anything, Eric?
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to this. My name's Eric. I'm from Process Studio. We've been working in collaboration with Bogart on this project for a little while. Yeah, I think the key points are that the design we're presenting to you does meet the intent and standards for the RMF as far as building height, the setbacks, the lot coverage. What it really is the lot size. And by subdividing these into sellable properties is that there is the opportunity for home ownership that also has these amenities of the private yard, but also the street-facing kind of shared courtyard, which we didn't feel like we were getting from that first iteration, which would have been a much larger sort of box building with probably a stair at either end, and parking taking up most of that ground floor plan. So with this iteration, we're sort of have a ground level access and entry for each unit. There is a private sort of entry and courtyard. There's a sense of, sort of ownership, even if it's not for sale, if it's rented for a little while. And that also, I think, provides or enhances maybe sort of the safety and sort of perception of the project for the people who are living there. Yeah, I think that's everything.
Is that all?
Yeah, I think
okay.
So. We're ready for questions.
All right, we will open this up to questions from the commission for both the staff and the applicant. Anyone? Okay, no questions. Hang tight right there. We'll open the public hearing. We'll open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this item? Seeing none, are there any emails? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. No questions? Concerns? Maybe a motion?
I'd make a motion, unless.
Okay. Sure.
Based on the findings listed in the staff report, the information presented, and input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the plan development petition and preliminary subdivision as proposed, subject to complying with the conditions listed in the staff report.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Burrows and a second by Commissioner Tuttle. Commissioner Gale?
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows?
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Gent,
Yes.
Commissioner Paredes,
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner Shearer,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira,
Yes.
and Commissioner Lee.
Yes.
The chair will also vote yes. You've got a unanimous decision for approval. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Cassie, I'm sorry I called you by the wrong name. I was looking on the wrong page.
Thank you guys, and thank you so much for your time. Much
Thank
appreciated.
you. We'll move on to the next item, the TAG SLC Master Plan and Zoning Map Amendments at approximately 135, 159, and 163 West Goltz Avenue and 1036 South Jefferson. Case numbers PLN PCM 2021-01307, PLN PCM 2021-01308, PLN PCM 2021-01309, PLN PCM 2022-00198, PLN PCM 2022-00199, and PLN PCM 2022-00207. Welcome, Brooke.
Thank you. So my name's Brooke Olson, and I'm a principal planner with the Planning Division. And tonight, I will provide you a brief overview of the project request, the standards of review, the requested amendments the applicant is seeking, and staff findings and recommendations. TAG SLC LLC is requesting zoning map and master plan amendments for the properties located at 135, 159, and 163 West Goltz Avenue and 1036 South Jefferson Street. First, to rezone the properties from RMF 35 moderate density multifamily residential to RMU residential mixed use. Second, to amend the ballpark station area plan, future land use designations of the subject properties from medium density residential to high density residential mixed use. And staff is recommending the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of denial to the City Council. As shown in the existing zoning map, the subject properties are located in the RMF 35 zone. The purpose of the district is to provide an environment suitable for a variety of moderate density housing types, including single-family, two-family, and multifamily dwellings with a maximum height of 35 feet. The applicant is proposing to rezone the properties to RMU, and the purpose of the RMU district is to reinforce the mixed-use character of the area and encourage the development of areas as high-density residential urban neighborhoods containing residential, service commercial, and small-scale office uses. The applicant is seeking the zoning map amendment to allow for the construction of multiple high-density multifamily residential dwellings on the subject properties. The subject properties are also located within the boundaries of the ballpark station area plan, which was adopted by the City Council in October 2022 in response to rapid growth and development pressure in the ballpark neighborhood. The plan includes a future land use map, which shows the properties are located within the Jefferson Park mixed-use area. The future land use description indicates that the future land use designation of the subject properties is medium-density residential. The applicant is proposing to amend the future land use designations of the subject properties to high-density residential mixed use, generally consisting of 5 to 7 stories. This designation would support the requested rezone. Since the applicant is requesting a zoning map amendment that allows a non-residential use of land, the applications are subject to compliance with the city's housing loss mitigation ordinance. The ordinance provides 3 options for mitigating the potential loss of housing. The applicant has chosen option A to build replacement housing. The housing loss mitigation reports for the subject properties are provided in attachment H, and all reports have been reviewed and approved by the Director of Community and Neighborhoods. It should be noted that Mayor Aaron Mendenhall has initiated a petition to implement the recommendations in the Ballpark Station Area Plan and rezone properties identified within 3 future land use areas in the plan. The subject properties are located within the boundaries of the city's rezone proposal. The city is proposing to rezone the properties to FBUN 1, Form-Based Urban Neighborhood 1, but may consider other similarly scaled zones. The city's petition is currently within the 45-day public engagement period and will tentatively be scheduled for a Planning Commission public hearing within the next couple months. Next, I'd like to provide a brief overview of each of the subject properties. First, 135 West Goltz Avenue is undeveloped vacant land located mid-block near the intersections of Goltz Avenue and Jefferson Street. The site is 8,119 square feet and previously contained a single-family dwelling, which was demolished in 2022 to allow for the redevelopment of the property. It should be noted that the dwelling was demolished after the petitions were filed and prior to review and approval of the housing loss mitigation plan for the property. Next, 159 and 163 West Goltz Avenue. The properties are also located mid-block along the south side of Goltz Avenue, and each site measures 6,490 square feet and contains a 1-story duplex as shown in the images. And finally, 1036 South Jefferson Street. The property is located mid-block along the west side of Jefferson Street, and the site is 7,405 square feet and contains a 1-story single-family home. In considering the context and the development pattern in the area, the subject sites are located approximately 3 blocks north of the Ballpark track station. The block south of Goltz Avenue is zoned RMF 35 with the exception of the open space zoning of Jefferson Park, which occupies the larger parcels located in the eastern and southern portions of the block. The subject properties located along Goltz Avenue are located mid-block in the northern portion of the block, which primarily consists of small parcels developed with small 1 to 2-story single-family, 2-family, and multifamily dwellings. The blocks north of Goltz Avenue are divided by Jefferson Street, and primarily zoned RMF 35, consisting of small parcels developed with small-scale single-family and 2-family dwellings. With the exception of the large property located along 200 West C9 Flats, a 6-story multifamily residential development, which is zoned RMU and sits directly north of 159 and 163 West Goltz Avenue. The property has been developed with minimal setbacks and landscaping consistent with the RMU zoning regulations. This slide shows some photos of the existing development along Goltz Avenue, showing the mix and diversity of housing types located along the street. The development pattern along Jefferson Street primarily consists of 1-story single-family and 2-family dwellings with the exception of the RMU zone property, C9 Flats. The block west of Jefferson Street is primarily zoned RMF 35 with the exception of 2 properties located along 200 West, including the C9 Flats and 1015 apartments. 1036 South Jefferson Street is located on the interior of the block, which is primarily composed of small parcels developed with 1-story single-family and some 2-family dwellings. 1015 Apartments, a higher density multifamily residential development, occupies a large parcel at the corner of 200 West and Meade Avenue. The property is zoned RMU and sits directly west of 1036 South Jefferson Street. The block east of Jefferson Street is zoned RMF 35 and is also developed with 1 and 2 story single-family dwellings, and a couple of larger building forms and parcels are located in the northern and eastern portions of the block along Meade Avenue and in the West Temple corridor. So this slide shows some photos of the existing development along Jefferson Street. The Planning Commission reviews the request for standards for compliance with the standards of general amendments located in Chapter 21A 50050 of the city's zoning ordinance. The standards include consistency with the city's master plan goals and policies, supporting the purposes of the zoning ordinance, the impact of the amendment on adjacent properties, consistency with applicable overlay districts and the adequacy of public facilities, services, infrastructure to serve the property. So staff identified several key considerations for the analysis of the project, which are discussed in details on pages 9 through 18 of the staff report, and I'll briefly summarize these. First, a comparison between the RMF 35 and RMU zoning districts. The full comparison table is shown in attachment D of the staff report. The RMU and RMF 35 zones have several similarities but overall vary significantly regarding the types of uses and development density they allow. RMF 35 generally permits low and moderate density residential uses, among other types of dwellings and uses that are generally associated with residential neighborhoods. In contrast, the RMU zoning district permits low, moderate, and high-density residential uses, in addition to a wide variety of office and commercial service and retail uses, such as restaurants, clinics, reception centers, and food production facilities. The development regulations for multifamily dwellings and non-residential uses also vary significantly. The RMF 35 zone requires a minimum lot area of 9,000 square feet for 3 to 11 dwelling units and 26,000 square feet for 12 or more units, while the RMU zoning district does not require a minimum lot area for multifamily residential dwellings. The RMF 35 zone requires large front, corner, side, and rear yard setbacks and smaller interior side setbacks, typical of the city's low and moderate density residential zones. In contrast, the RMU zone does not require any front, corner, side, or interior side yard setbacks for multifamily residential and non-residential uses. Both zoning districts require similar rear yard setbacks for multifamily dwellings. The RMF 35 zone also includes lot coverage requirements for each use, and in comparison, the RMU zoning district has no specific building coverage requirements. The RMF 35 zoning district also allows a maximum building height of 35 feet, while the RMU zoning district allows a building height of 75 feet for residential buildings and 45 feet for non-residential buildings. As far as parking is concerned, RMF 35 requires parking for all residential uses, and RMU is exempt from minimum parking requirements for all residential uses and the majority of non-residential uses. The RMU zone includes several design standards for street-facing building facades, whereas the low-density residential zones, including the RMF multifamily residential zones, do not have design standard regulations. RMU also has buffer yard requirements for lots abutting single-family and two-family residential districts, but no buffer requirements for lots abutting the RMF 35. Staff also reviewed the proposal for consistency with the city-wide master plan and policies. Overall, staff found the proposed amendments are not supported by the applicable city plans and policies, and I'll touch briefly on a few of the main findings. First, the ballpark station area plan. As mentioned, the properties are located in the Jefferson Park mixed-use future land use area. The plan indicates that redevelopment of this area should overall provide a mix of uses and building scales. The plan identifies that larger building forms are appropriate along corridors where large building forms are already present or where it is abutting the tracks line on 200 West or along the West Temple corridor. These larger building forms should consist of approximately 5 to 7 stories and provide some commercial spaces and residential amenities. The boundaries of the areas designated for high-density mixed-use development are shown in dark orange in the map on the left. The plan further states that smaller building scales should be focused on areas adjoining Jefferson Street and the Avenue Streets. Smaller building scales should generally consist of 2 to 3 stories and almost entirely comprise of medium-density residential uses. So the boundaries of the areas designated for medium-density residential development are shown in light orange on the map. The plan establishes several goals, strategies, and actions that reiterate the intent of the area and do not support the proposal. A main strategy identified in the plan is to provide a diversity of housing types and options for different incomes, family status, age, and needs. The plan also emphasizes that supporting the neighborhood as a distinguishable place involves consideration for creating a balanced mix of uses. The plan aims to establish a balance of overall increasing density in the neighborhood and retain small areas for a mix of lower and middle density housing types to provide a mix of housing options in the neighborhood. Staff found that changing the future land use designation and zoning of the 4 subject properties from medium density residential to high density mixed use would significantly reduce the mix of middle housing options in the neighborhood, as large portions of the neighborhood are currently designated for high density mixed use development. As shown in the map, including larger areas outside of the Jefferson Park mixed use area, shown in dark blue, green, light pink, and dark pink on the plan's overall future land use map. The subject properties are located within the only area designated for medium density residential development, specifically aimed to provide missing middle housing options in the area. In addition, staff on the proposal would support some initiatives in Plan Salt Lake, the city's overall master plan, and growing SLC. However, there are several principles and initiatives in the plan that do not support the proposal. Plan Salt Lake includes broad initiatives that align with the proposal, which support increasing residential density in close proximity to transit and open space, and encouraging a mix of land uses. However, the proposal is not supported by several initiatives that speak to maintaining neighborhood stability and character and providing access to a wide variety of housing types. And last, growing SLC, the city's current adopted 5-year housing plan. Similar to Plan Salt Lake, staff found that some goals and objectives in the plan do not support the proposal, and some do, as discussed in detail in the staff report. So overall, the proposed zoning map and master plan amendment would result in a zoning map that does not align with the policies that promote diversifying the housing stock, increasing housing options, restoring the missing middle housing types, and enabling moderate density increases while minimizing neighborhood impacts. Next, staff considered zoning compatibility with adjacent properties. The RMU zoning and high-density development pattern is located on the corner parcels as previously discussed that have frontage on multiple streets in the 200 West corridor, adjacent to the tracks line. The subject properties are interior parcels scattered along Goltz Avenue and Jefferson Street within the center of the block, which is characterized by a low to medium density residential development pattern. If the subject properties are rezoned to RMU, the properties could be developed with high-density large building forms up to 75 feet in height and minimal yard requirements. So the 75-foot height allowance of the RMU zone would significantly overshadow the abutting RMF35 properties, which entirely consist of small dwellings approximately 16 to 30 feet in height, and would also exceed the height allowance of the RMF35 zoning district by 40 feet. The RMU zoning regulations do not consist of architectural or site design requirements that could mitigate impacts on the adjacent properties and uses within the RMF35 zone, such as building scale transitions or buffer yard requirements. If the proposal is approved, new high-density development on the subject properties would fragment the small-scale single-family and middle housing development pattern and character found within the interior of the block. So staff is of the opinion the proposal is not compatible with the adjacent properties, the development pattern of the block, or the development intent for the neighborhood. As of today, staff received 23 email public comments prior to this hearing, all of which voiced opposition to the proposal, with several common concerns which are listed on this slide, and I won't read through them all. The Ballpark and Central Ninth Community Councils also submitted letters today, which have been added to the Dropbox. So in conclusion, based on the information and findings presented, it is planning staff's opinion that the request does not meet the applicable standards of approval and therefore recommends the Planning Commission forward a recommendation of denial to the City Council.
Thank you.
The applicant is also in attendance and has prepared a presentation.
Okay. Applicant? Please state your name for the record and you'll have 10 minutes.
I'll hand it over. Sorry. I'll just get it going.
Hello,
here.
Planning Commission. My name is Jordan Atkin, representing the applicant. First, I will thank, this way, okay. Thank Brooke for her patience. This has been a mind bender of an application that's been going on for a year or something. And we'll get to it. So these are the properties. The image on the left are properties that we own in this area, and the properties on the right are the properties that are specific to this application. We really want to highlight the little white circle there because both of those represent being a quarter of a mile from a fixed transit stop. And I think really the bulk of our argument here is that we think that the ballpark master plan got it wrong. So a little bit of the timeline of how we got here. We were we've been a property owner in this, the area within the ballpark master plan since 2017, and have acquired a number of these properties over those years. We were very excited to hear about the ballpark master plan. We were part of that, the engagement of it. When the first draft came out, this specific area was called out to be a mid-density, which really caught us by surprise, given that we were essentially a quarter of a mile smack dab in between two transit stops. So we voiced a lot of concerns to the consultant that the city had hired, as well as the staff member who had taken this project through, articulated, what we thought this area could be, went back to the drawing board with the consultant, and when it came back, it became the Jefferson mixed-use plan, mixed-use area, which called for 5 to 7 story buildings, at least what I remember, 5 to 7 story buildings along 200 West and West Temple, and then the avenue streets should be 2 to 3 stories, which is less than what is allowed now. So we voiced more concern, and after not really feeling like we were going to get anywhere, we did the only thing that we really thought we could do, which was make an application to amend the zoning for our parcels. It was really the most aggressive way that we could raise our hand and say, please listen to us, and let's see if there's a different path forward. And why did we think that? If we look at the city as a whole, in almost every instance, when you're along a tracks line, you have high-density residential mixed-use development pattern. So this is along the stars are the track stop. So along North Temple, that's consistent. Along 400 South, that's consistent. Even a lot more density allowed along the current 200 West. So we're like, this just doesn't make sense why this would be this way. So the first proposal we put forward was FBUN2, which I think was in December of 22, thinking that maybe it was a little bit of a middle ground between what already existed, these red parcels being RMU already, and what the city's vision was, which allows about 50 feet in height and 4 stories. We met with the ballpark, I think it was a joint meeting, but the ballpark community council, and the overwhelming opposition that please do not bring FBUN2. It seemed like people didn't like what some of the developments that had happened in the Central Ninth community, which the predominant zoning just to the north of the 900 South off-ramp is FBUN2. So yet again, we were scratching our head about what to do. It really seemed more appropriate to be a TSA zone, but I've been before this body before with the term spot zoning and thought, well, certainly there's no TSA over here. I'm going to get slaughtered on that one. So let's go for what is the only two rezones that I'm aware of in this area, which are on the same streets as we're talking about, which went from RMF 35 to RMU back in 2012, and a lot has changed since then. So when we, you don't really read this, but when we kept asking why is this specific area designated to be this mid-density when across the street on 200 West is called out to be the highest heart of the neighborhood, which goes even further north than we are, further away from the track stops. Why is this? And really and you guys were here for it, The only real thing we got was, well, they're kind of small lots and it might be awkward to have buildings over 30 feet in height. And certainly if you just put a big box on a small lot, yeah, it would be. But with a little creativity, I think we would hope that we could do a little better. So we applied that logic just south of us, which is an area, actually a lot cuter streets in our view, of the south side of Lucy and the south side of Paxton, which are called in the heart of the neighborhood. Might be kind of hard to read, but it's basically 4,000 square foot lots. So the logic that applied to the area that we're in of, oh, these are small lots, even though they're a little bit bigger, it's going to be awkward to have them be bigger buildings. That logic didn't extend directly to the south of us with nice tree-lined streets where the lots are actually even smaller. Within the master plan, and Brooke called it out, larger building forms are appropriate along corridors where large building forms already exist. Okay, well, where do we get this idea? 43% of Goltz is already a 6-story building. It is the predominant form, and it is one of the only urban apartment buildings that has been developed in this entire area. I think there's another one on West Temple that's an affordable housing project, and another one that Wasatch just did down at 17th and 2nd West. The project, we didn't highlight it here, but to the north of us, the 1015 Apartments is a 4-story building, which was also rezoned from RMF 30 to RMU. And then along Jefferson, it represents about 19% of the frontage along that street. So and you can't really see it, but the scale shows that single-family home next to this. So our request as a whole may be a little bit of a patchwork here, but I don't have the legal ability to apply for everybody's property to be rezoned. I can only do that for my own. More about timeline. So this was the condition in 2012, and then how we started there, and now we're here with the adoption of the ballpark plan. This is not our proposal. This is a visual of how we see the area having a potential to develop. These are all buildings that we have already built in Salt Lake or are in the process of building that fit already on the lots that we have without adding anything else, and just shows that it maybe if all the single family homes stay there, but it fits, from our view, fits right in with what it could be and what the overall vision that we would see would be appropriate with what the city's trying to do with the ballpark area. I'll skip through these. These are just some more close-ups of how those would look. And then I think this is kind of the end, is an eyes on the street. In practical terms, if you have we need people in our parks to keep them safe and keep them activated and keep them vibrant. This is the only meaningful green space currently in existence in the whole ballpark master plan. We hope that more is coming with the redevelopment of the public utilities building and the ballpark. But as of now, this is about what we have. And it's not the safest place. We'd like it to be better. And if we're only allowed to build 2-story buildings here, you cannot see over a fence. If we're allowed to stretch that up a little further, it has an opportunity to activate it more and to keep it safer for everyone in the community. So I guess this is basically, let's look at what the ballpark has, what the vision is and what it has the ability to be, not necessarily what's there today. So in whole, we just disagree with the ballpark plan, and this is really the only thing that I could come up with to attempt to defend our position. And I appreciate the consideration.
Thank you. Questions, concerns from the commission? Okay, you're not going to get peppered with questions yet. Okay, I will open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak on this item? Is there someone from the community council? Step up to the microphone, state your name. Are you an official representative of the community council?
Yes, I am. My name is Doug Flagler. I serve on the Ballpark Community Council.
Okay, you get 5 minutes.
I'm also chair of the Central Ninth Community Council too, which Central Ninth also submitted a. I'm just going to summarize the letters that were sent in from both community councils. During a public meeting that we had on the proposal, we had overwhelming opposition to the proposal from residents of the area, not only people that were immediately adjacent, but also residents that lived in the area. Many of the things that we heard was that it didn't fit the current area and the current housing, and that it would have negative impacts on parking, and that it would cause significant shadows and having tall buildings like this around single-family homes, and that they didn't like the patchwork of zoning that this would be proposing. Also, with the new ballpark area station plan not even being implemented yet, there was serious concern amongst the council that we would like to see that be implemented before we start making changes to it. And I also would like to say that the council, there was unanimous support on the council to submit the letter as well. Also, the ballpark area station plan, it mirrors that of Central Ninth, where you have FBUN 1 on the interior streets and FBUN 2 on the outside streets, so Second West and West Temple, and I think that is a good use for that zoning, and upzoning it would be detrimental to that zone, to those zonings. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. Yeah, and finally, we would like to see the ballpark area station plan go through the process of the rezone with it, and before we start making changes to the area, before that even takes place. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience? Okay, step up to the microphone and state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Charles Button. I appreciate the commission's time here, and definitely Brooke. She's been very helpful with communicating all of this. So first off, we have 20 signatures here, petitions with all of local neighbors with addresses here against this rezoning. So that's definitely one of the first things I'd like to bring up is 20 neighbors that do not want to see this at the least. And then, you know, seeing this picture, there's also multiple buildings on here that TAG isn't currently proposing. So it's definitely showing a picture of a more urban setting right here. And they've added a lot more trees than even in my backyard. So it's very deceiving to see how this could be, because it is kind of a beautiful urban setting. But that's not what they're proposing. They're proposing like 3 of these out of, you know, the 2 other ones. And most of the community thinks C9 was snuck in there, C9 Flats. No one really appreciates that apartment. And, you know, it was designed well with parking, but they charge for 1 space, and 1 space is free. TAG would like to do the same. They also pointed out when making offers to all these homes that they would not want to purchase this home being beside an apartment complex due to light and space concerns. How do you think that's going to deal with the rest of our buildings when they put large buildings beside our homes and we can't sell or move because of the same reason that they don't want to buy Kathy's house? I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak tonight? Step right up. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Okay, my name is Marcus Wright. I'm a resident. I live on Goltz Avenue, and I also represent a group called Friends of Jefferson Park. And I think our group has concerns about this proposal as well because of the impact it'll have on the park. Having a 6-story building right next to the park will have shade issues. these buildings are not going to have doors on the front door of the park. They're going to be apartment buildings, so they're not going to add eyes in the park that way either. But overall, it doesn't fit the scale and the character of these streets, so we're against it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Step right up and state your name for the record.
My name is Lee Anderson, also resident on Goltz Ave. And thought I'd have to explain it more, but this picture pretty much does it. That's my house, right on the other side between that brick house. You can't even see it in this picture. But the main issues that Brooke brought up is that, yeah, it allows them to have no setback and build 7 stories tall, hodgepodge through the neighborhood. And just to point out, this one is not one of the proposals, and neither is that one. But C9 has been a big problem for us since its construction. We had to fight them to even put that parking in to begin with. They wanted no parking. And in TAG SLC's proposal, I noticed a big emphasis on transit-oriented, so I wonder if parking is even going to be provided, which given the RMU, it's not a requirement. They don't have to require any parking. It can be 6 stories of apartments, which is what C9 wanted to begin with. And yeah, that's very concerning. And C9, I mean, all the time we have domestic problems in the streets from folks there, transiency from them and in the park. And they have, and in these new ones, there would be no green space. All the green space is the park and our lawns for everyone in C9's dogs. We are constantly picking up dog turds in the park, in our yards, because they just don't care. It has not been a good thing for the neighborhood. And it's an eyesore because it is 6 foot tall and blocking all the houses south of it. So yeah, I do not support this. I am one of the emails that Brooke got. I am on the signatures as well. And yeah, that's my bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Step right up and state your name for the record.
Thank you. My name's Hank Maston. I live at 131 Fremont, which is just opposite the park of the Goltz Ave properties. I'm against this, and I sent an email to Brooke for all the reasons stated, but I think so much consideration was put into the ballpark plan. Excuse me, I need some water, but so much consideration was put into the plan, and now we've basically, excuse me, it's difficult to know what to pay attention to. So much consideration was put into it based on C9 existing. The RMF 35 is what everyone's decided was acceptable, and I'm sorry that TAG SLC made a bet on these properties being RMU or anticipating that they would essentially get their way to have whatever they wanted in this area. But that ballpark station plan gave so much consideration to the heart of the ballpark for a diversity of housing. Excuse me. And this project would take away ownership opportunities, and it would essentially green light this whole area to become a C9, and you'd see TAG SLC and other developers go after all of these properties and just completely erase the heart of the ballpark vision that everyone came up with. So for that reason, I'm against it.
Thank you. Anyone else? If you'd like, step right up, state your name for the record.
Hi. I just want to point out the obvious as far as intentions. The TAG SLC website itself states that their intentions are for, it says, we approach our opportunities with an emphasis on maximizing the value of the land opportunity and investors' wealth preservation. The thoughtfulness of our asset selection and concentrated approach lend to providing value to tenants, neighbors in our community. So I don't really think we're even much of a thought that it's added in the end. It's just really, it's really bothersome that that's the first thing you see on the website. So just like that to be noted.
Thank you. Anyone else? Step right up. State your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Carlton Allen. I am a resident of the neighborhood, and I just want to say that I'm not exactly against, or I'm absolutely against this. I've got a few friends in the C9 flats, and they often report a bunch of issues in there, just people coming and going all the time. I really like the fact that our neighborhood is kind of coming together, and it's up and coming, and everyone kind of knows each other around here. And if you just add more apartment buildings, you're just gonna have people coming and going more. There's not really much growth for the community that we're looking for. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I think, have we gotten everybody in the audience? Yeah, okay. I'll make the last call for anyone else who wants to speak. Okay, are there any emails? No? Okay. I will close the public hearing on this item and bring it back to the commission. Questions, concerns?
Am I able to respond to those comments?
Sure.
Yeah, I messed that up last time. So just a couple things. I fully acknowledge that change is hard, and our whole city is going through these pretty intense growing pains. And I think that when projects are put, everyone wants affordable housing. Everybody wants, their friends to be able to live here as long as it's not next door to me. Our proposal would be a dramatic shift from, if you look at the single family homes, but if you look at the broader context of what the vision the city outlaid in the ballpark master plan, where these buildings maybe aren't going to be on this street, but are going to be on presumably almost every other street in this area. When you take a little bit further step out, I think it makes a little bit more sense, but I do acknowledge that change is very difficult. I want to point out we did include images of two projects that were not part of it. There is a logic to it. Our two properties on 200 West are designated to be higher, so they didn't need to be part of this, because until now I didn't know they were going to be FBO2, which is also inconsistent with the ballpark plan, but we'll get to that later. And then 1036, kind of the straggler on the east side of the road, that lot's 42 feet wide. We developed a 12-unit project under the FBUN2 zone in Central 9th with 8 parking stalls, and agreed that maybe a 6-story building wasn't appropriate there, so we didn't include it. These other ones fit the context of what these the size and urban style buildings would be. And finally, I do agree, completely agree, that if you disregard the only 2 multifamily buildings that have already been rezoned, that ours do not fit. But you have to discount what's already been done, and whether it's good or bad, C9 is there, and it is the predominant feature of this entire area. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners?
Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky one because I do think that the streets support higher density, and it is also frustrating for me to see a site that's close to transit within a walking distance circle that can't be more dense. And it's just tricky with the fact that we've already designated this in the master plan. I think it could be supported if it were maybe clustered a little bit more closely together in a few of these corner areas or a few more parcels. But I think what you guys do is great for the community. You guys are bringing a lot more housing to the city, which is desperately needed. So I support what you guys are doing. It's tricky. So.
Yeah, I kind of share the same sentiment. I think increased density is something that I support as well. I gotta commend Jordan. I think it's quite creative and ingenious in your designs. Just a quick question to staff, I guess. The C9 flats, how long ago was that one built? Do you know by any chance?
I don't know the exact date off the top of my head, but I think it was about 2012, but management may be able to speak to that more.
Well, I actually worked on that rezone, one of my first projects here, and that was in 2010, and I think the project was probably permitted in like 2012.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, I think it's a great project. What you guys do is great. I also share those same sentiments as previously stated. So thank you.
I have one question for staff. Can you pull up the slide that shows the proposed zoning in the request from the mayor's office?
Yes. Just one moment.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have a similar question to you. Is what is the difference compared to those two zones versus, because I think there's more of a discrepancy between the current zoning versus the new proposed zoning and height and density. So I'd be curious.
The difference between the FBUN1 and RMF 35 or RMU?
The new proposed zone versus the RMU. Because you gave us the existing zone versus the RMU, but you didn't give us the proposed zone versus the RMU.
Yeah, and this proposal will be coming to Planning Commission within the next couple months, but it's still in the early planning stages. So we'll be holding some like public engagement, and we're in that 45-day public engagement period. So the FBUN1 zone has a maximum building height of 30 feet, and it's a form-based zone. So there's specific development requirements depending on what type of building form is proposed. And in the FBUN1 zone, it's single family, two-family, cottage development, as well as row houses are the forms allowed within that zone. I don't have all of the regulations for the FBUN1 zone, but yeah, if you have any additional questions, I'm
That's
sure
okay. I was
we
just
could pull those up.
comparing scales, that's all.
I guess in addition to us having spent a ton of money on transit infrastructure, which seems kind of like a waste of taxpayer money if we're not going to put people there. So that is largely, the state money that goes to UTA. We've also put awesome bike lanes on 300 West, and we're almost done them on the 9 line. And people actually use them. If you've actually been out, the 9 line's not even done, but people are using them. And I'm kind of like, why are we spending this money to create? So one of the things I do like, and staff can correct me on this, we could theoretically put retail if we used RMU, right? That regardless of what there's no concrete plans attached to this. And so if we're trying to create walkable neighborhoods or places people can cycle 1 to 3 miles, and we have the best cycling infrastructure in the city, they're protected bike lanes on 300 West, protected bike lanes on the 9 line that should be done this summer. And again, I don't know how many of you guys have biked this. It literally is the best biking infrastructure in the city at this point. And then we're going to be like, no, only single-family homes or low-density residential. It just doesn't seem like a good use of taxpayer money.
Anyone else? Any more comments?
I'll just ask a question, and I guess I don't know who to even address it to. So I wasn't here when this, obviously I don't know if any of us were here when the C9 deal was approved. Is there any evidence or is there any record that some of the changes, some of the eventual provisions in the ballpark plan were a result of an effort to control that from happening again? Is there anything that anyone is aware of? I honestly don't know. Is there anything that we could look at to say that the zoning and the master plan for the ballpark area, that there were any efforts to specifically control the development of additional high-density housing?
I wasn't directly involved in the development of the ballpark station area plan. I know that some managers may have more to add to that, but what the community wanted for this area was the medium density residential to be retained.
Okay.
And the larger building forms to be established along 200 West and the West Temple corridor for that area specifically, but to maintain what was existing in the block.
Okay.
And just to add to that, I think, Brooke, you're hitting that right, is that the plan is not advocating for no more development and for no more density. It's just trying to appropriately place that density.
Right.
And so the plan
specifically spoke to keeping that interior block at a lower density, kind of mirroring, again, I think somebody mentioned it, as we did in Central Ninth, which is also a very transit-friendly neighborhood, but keeping the taller buildings on the edges and the middle at a lower density.
Okay, thank you so much.
The chairperson, can I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. The RMU zone seems kind of extreme. Like you can do anything. You could, like, there's all kinds of stuff you could build if it was zoned to RMU, and that seems a little bit. That seems too extreme to me on the list of allowed or conditional uses. And I agree with your assessment that it doesn't comply for these reasons, rezoning that. So I'm more likely to recommend against this zoning change. I'll make a motion unless somebody wants to stop me.
Go for it.
Can I do them together? This is for the master plan amendments and the zoning map amendments. Sure. Based on the information presented and the discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the city council deny this proposal for the master plan amendments and the zoning map amendments for the following reasons. Well, the reasons outlined in the staff report.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Burrows and a second by Commissioner Gale. Commissioner Shearer.
Yes.
Commissioner Paredes.
I'll vote no.
Commissioner Gent.
No.
Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen.
No.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira.
No.
Commissioner Lee.
No.
And the chair would vote yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 noes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 yeses. We have a tie. Would someone like to make another motion?
I'll make a motion. Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the city council approve this proposal for master plan amendments.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Gent.
Just a point of clarification, are you not suggesting the approval of the zoning map amendment?
I was reading from the motion sheet, but I would consider, yes, I will. Can I amend my motion to also include the zoning map amendments in the same motion,
Yes.
please? Thank you,
Yes.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner.
And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Paredes.
May I speak to that motion, please?
You what?
May I make a comment about that motion?
Oh, yes, yes.
I think one of the things that may have been missed in this rush to bring in much higher density, it's much higher density, is the fact that the neighborhood has worked with the city for many months, if not years, to put together a ballpark plan, which is now coming forward. I think that this disrespects the neighborhood's efforts by just preempting, as TAG wants to do. He said, basically, this is a way of protesting what the neighborhood has come to. And so that is why I would not be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner, we'll call for the vote now if anybody doesn't have
Can we
any more.
clarify again what this motion is for? This is to recommend approval of the zoning
Correct.
change and the master plan change. So if you vote yes for this, this means you're voting yes for the rezone.
Correct.
Thanks.
Commissioner Lee?
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
No.
Commissioner Shearer,
No.
Commissioner Paredes,
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner Gent,
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows,
No.
Commissioner Gale.
No.
Chair will also vote no. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did we do it again? Yep, 5 and 5.
May I just make a statement for the record? I concur with what Commissioner Scheer said. I think approval of this kind of zoning change and change to the master plan really flies in the face of our concept that neighborhoods can have impactful contributions to how their neighborhoods are developed. So I just want to get that on the record that I support that statement.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think, is RMU the most residential upzone possible in our city?
It is considered a high-density zone, and I believe it is the highest residential zone.
So that's as extreme as you can be.
So other than like downtown zones, like D1 and D2, it is definitely probably the greatest amount of height you can get.
Is it possible to make a motion for no recommendation to the city council?
I'm glad you asked. It is an extremely rare thing, but we have had a situation in the past where we could not pass a motion and ultimately planning staff forward no recommendation. You could make a motion for no recommendation. I don't know how much the city council would appreciate that, but you can do it.
Well, I'm going to make a motion. Based on the information presented in discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the city council deny this proposal for master plan amendments and for zoning map amendments for the reasons listed in the staff report.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Christensen. Do I have a second?
That's a recommendation to deny both, correct? I will second that.
Okay, and a second by Commissioner Gale. Any comments?
To clarify, if you vote yes on this, this means you do not want a rezone. If you vote yes, that means no rezone.
Okay, we'll try this again. Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen.
Yes.
Commissioner Gent.
No.
Commissioner Paredes.
I'll vote no.
Commissioner Scheer.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira.
No.
And Commissioner Lee.
No.
The chair will vote yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6 yeses, 1, 2, 3, 4 noes. The motion passes. Good luck.
Thank you. I appreciate your time and consideration.
Can I clarify? Will the city council hear that we voted 6-4? Will they get that specific information? All right.
Do they hear that? Yeah.
A break.
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. Everybody needs a potty stop. So we'll continue on with the meeting. We have a briefing for Thriving in Place. And this is Angela and Suze. Take it away.
All right. Thanks so much for having us tonight. I am Susan Lundmark, Suze, with Transportation Division. Angela Price with Communities and Neighborhoods. We'll just get started with our presentation. Thriving in Place has been a community-driven process to document and understand displacement and develop a plan of action, and it's been a collaboration among many entities, including our consultant groups, which was Community Planning Collaborative, the University of Utah's CMP program, and Urban Displacement Project out of the University of California, Berkeley. The plan, the commission has received a couple, at least 2 or 3 briefings, I believe. So you know a lot of this, but it was divided into 2 phases. Listening and learning was the first phase, and phase 2 has been crafting collaborative solutions. We've had a lot of community input, over 2,500 people who've shared their experiences, including focus groups with community liaisons, in-language focus groups, and youth workshops. The data on this can more easily be accessed through the project website, but the key takeaways are that displacement is a problem in the city right now, and that it's affecting many people, and we'll talk through some of that as well. And again, documenting the severity of the challenge shows that for parts of the city that have historically been more affordable or are more affordable now, they are also experiencing displacement right now. And so there aren't more affordable places for people to move to once they are displaced. So displacement pressures are high and getting worse. It impacts many people and disproportionately impacts households of color in the city. Because there are no places to move that are affordable that aren't experiencing displacement, there's no relief valves. And in the city, there's not enough housing in general, with a severe lack of affordable units. There are some challenges with the action plan, including, or moving forward, that people see new housing development as part of the problem, not necessarily the solution, and also the city falls into that category in many people's mind as part of the problem. And historically, there's been a pretty decent focus on production, but less of a focus on preservation and very little on protecting tenants. And as we've discussed, displacement is happening now.
Is just one other piece on the data that I think is really important to note, that our consultant team, Urban Displacement Project, which is similar to our KEMC Gardner Policy Institute, they're a think tank out of Berkeley. They analyze census tracts throughout the entire region from Brigham City down to Provo, and we saw high levels of displacement throughout that entire region. I want to say there were maybe 2 or 3 census tracts in that entire, pretty much the entire Wasatch Range that people who are being displaced could go to. So this is very much a Salt Lake City issue, but it's also a statewide issue. And so it's really important to note that we in Salt Lake City are doing a lot to further affordable housing, and we are making an impact, but there's certainly a lot of work to be done here within the city and also throughout the state. So I just want to caveat that the things that we've been doing have been helping, and the work that you guys are doing on the commission certainly helps as well. So we're here tonight. We're in phase 2, which is the development of the policies. You'll see I handed out what we've coined the placemat, because we literally handed it out at a lunch meeting one day, and so it's become kind of our joke that it's the placemat. But on the front side, or on one side, you'll see our 2-year action plan, and on the other side, you'll see the 22 strategies that are proposed. And I'll go over that in a little bit more detail here in a minute. We've started our 45-day public engagement period for the draft plan, and we've been presenting to community councils over the past few weeks, and kicking off with a briefing here this evening for you, with the intention of having a public hearing on the plan in July. the end of July. So what the plan aims to do is to elevate anti-displacement as a citywide priority, increase city investment in services to help lower income tenants avoid eviction and remain in Salt Lake City, and then prioritize the creation of more affordable housing, change how we work with impacted communities, and develop new policies to incentivize affordable housing and create a public benefit. Oops, sorry. It's important to keep in mind there are no magic fixes. I've been doing housing policy for 15 years, and I certainly wish that there was a wand that could be waved that would give everybody in our state, even in our country, that wanted a safe house to live in, that opportunity. So it's important to note that this plan has a lot of policy recommendations and a lot of overlap because there is no wand that we can wave to solve this problem. One of, I think, the most frustrating things for me as I was going through these policy developments is the state preemption. My position with the city, I work really closely with the legislature, so I'm at the Capitol all 45 days and already working on our land use and housing issues that we're going to be bringing forth in the next legislative session. And I can tell you that so many of the best practices that we studied from across the country and solutions that we wanted to bring forth, we had state preemption blocking those. And so we have a lot of work to do at the state level, especially on protecting tenants. We have seen a lot of progress over the past few years in affordable housing, with this legislative session this year being the most investment that we've seen in affordable housing over 20 years, and the most housing bills have passed this session. So we are making progress. It's incremental and certainly not as fast as it needs to be, but I want to caveat that because a lot of the things that we heard from the community were things that we aren't able to do. For example, control rents. It's important to note that the city has finite resources and capacity, as you guys know. We passed the mayor's budget last night, again, with a record amount of investment in affordable housing, but we only have so many resources here within the city. There are many forces that the city doesn't control, like the market, the interest rates, which are driving up the cost of housing right now. And then working differently is going to be incredibly challenging. This is forcing us to look at the problem in a way that we haven't before, and that's how we make change, right, is looking at things differently. So the action framework focuses on 6 kind of main foundational pillars. The first is protecting tenants from displacement. The second is preserving the affordable housing we have. And I would say 1 and 2 are really important pieces that we haven't probably had as much focus on as we would like. And part of the impetus of this study was to really understand what our affordable housing stock looked like in the city and what was happening to that housing stock. The third is producing more affordable housing. This is an area that we have actually really been excelling in, especially over the past few years with record investment in affordable housing development by the mayor and city council. We certainly need to expand our funding resources, and as I mentioned, we've seen a lot of investment from the state this year over the past few years, and record investment here within the city. Thinking about partners to collaborate with that are out-of-the-box partners, and certainly advocating for tenants at the state level. To get into the policies a little bit, so as you'll see, we have 22 strategic priorities that we have laid out here that all fall under those kind of 6 pillars that I just discussed. This graphic is really good depiction of each one of those, but what it doesn't show, and we've tried and we're still working on a way to depict how these intertwine with one another. So for example, adopting a displaced tenants preference policy directly correlates with adopting a community benefit policy. So a lot of these aren't siloed by themselves. They have to come together. They have to weave together to create this bigger framework. You'll see we have the near-term action priorities, which I'll get into here more in a minute, but those are what we're proposing to start working on right now, and those are outlined on the 2-year action plan. And I'm happy to, I'll maybe just go through the slides, and then if you guys have specific questions on any of the policies here, we can go into that. For each strategic priority, there's a page, 1 to 2 to 3 pages that outline each one of these 22 strategies. And each one of those contains a purpose, context, steps, lead, partners, schedule, resources, and then best practices and food for thought. It's important to note that each one of these policies will have potentially its own public engagement process. So for example, the community benefit policy is something that our team is already working on that's going to amend 5 different titles of our city code. And for that, we would go to a 45-day public engagement process. We'd bring that before the Planning Commission and City Council for recommendation. There are other policies that are more funding related that are programmatic that would go through, a competitive application process, or they would go through a policy resolution within the city. So the plan really just lays the foundation of these 22 items and gives us some ideas of how we can look to other cities or look for best practices. And then it will be upon us within the city and the city implementation team to create those more granular policies. So I think it's important to note we're kind of zooming out with the plan, looking at it holistically, and then each one of those will have its own process that it will go through. And some of them are things that we're already doing that we'll be ramping up. One of the big impetus of creating Thriving in Place was to replace the housing loss mitigation ordinance, and I'm happy to get as granular with this as you guys want. I can also direct you to a city council presentation that I did on April 12th of last year, where I really talked about a lot of the issues with the existing housing loss mitigation ordinance. As you guys know, these plans come before you. You had one this evening, and the existing ordinance doesn't work as it's currently crafted. And so the mayor and the city council, our marching orders before we went to bid for this project was to really analyze why people were being displaced in Salt Lake City and how we can overturn almost 100 years of redlining and displacement happening within the city, but then also how we can revamp our housing loss mitigation ordinance and ensure that if we're losing housing that we're replacing it, especially if we're losing that naturally occurring affordable housing. So we've created what we're calling a community benefit policy. It really looks at supporting tenants and providing tenant relocation assistance and a displaced tenant preference policy. It looks at preserving and creating affordable housing through a community benefit policy and also ties to the affordable housing incentives. And then it also improves our data systems by tracking rent and affordability data. I've been in a lot of conversations over my time here at the city on the housing loss mitigation ordinance, and I think we've struck a really good balance here on what we've heard from our community on we want to preserve affordable housing. We want to preserve the character of our neighborhood. We want to understand the problem better than we currently do, and we want to support our tenants. So I'm confident, I'm hopeful that we've struck a good balance here. These ordinances are being worked on right now and will be coming before you guys hopefully in the next few months. And then, as I said, we have a 2-year action plan. So this is what we are proposing that we start work on. When I presented this to the City Council a few months ago, they gave us marching orders to start working on drafting housing loss mitigation replacement, which is what we've been doing with the community benefit policy. And they also told us that if there were things that we wanted to include in the mayor's recommended budget, there were near-term action priorities that we felt were things that we needed to start doing right now, that we could do that. And so I'm happy to announce that we did include a few of those items in the mayor's recommended budget, including the tenant relocation assistance program, and then also creating a tenant resource and navigation center. So both of those items were funded, and that work will begin on creating those staff positions and starting that work there. We also have 3 teams that we're going to be creating that I'll go to here in a second. But these are what we're proposing as things that we want to start working on right now that we feel will have the most impact as we start kind of weaving all of the pieces of this puzzle together. You can see here the 3 teams that we're proposing to put together: a tenant support team, an affordable housing development team, and then an anti-displacement team. And then also having ongoing collaboration platforms. I think one of the most successful parts of this project, I can tell you we're probably, public engagement ends on the 26th, so we're probably about 30 days in on engagement. We've been doing a lot of outreach, and we've had 17 people take the survey as of yesterday. We had 2,500 people in the initial engagement, and I think that that speaks a lot to what we heard in the community and how we built that into this plan. So part of that was having a what we called a policy A team, which will be similar to the city implementation team. It's a multi-departmental team where we really looked at how these policies would impact the work that we're doing and stretch us beyond what we're doing to think outside of the box. We had a city stakeholder team that consisted of representatives from every department but the airport. And then we also had a community working group that consisted of over 20 different entities, including community council representatives, developers, community advocates. So we had a pretty diverse group there, and I think that that really speaks to where we're at with the plan and how we got these policies, that it was such a collaborative effort. We really listened to the community, and we want to continue that. We made so many course corrections over the development of this plan based on things that we were hearing from the community, things that we heard from the Planning Commission, the City Council, changes that were happening at the state level, policies that we were implementing at the city level. And so we want to continue that, know that things are dynamic, and we want to be able to shift the trajectory if needed. And then lastly, we just want to hear from you guys this evening, or you can go online and take the survey. We want to get feedback on, are we nailing it? Are there things that we need to change? Make sure that we really are sticking true to our initial intent of having this be a community-driven plan that's for our residents, that helps mitigate the displacement that we're seeing here in Salt Lake. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have, go granular on any of the issues.
Thanks so much. I appreciate all your efforts on this. So I also am very sympathetic that we don't have a magic bullet. Nothing we can do can instantly solve this. And we sort of, I think the extreme case of displacement is, of course, homelessness. And we are seeing a lot of that. And I'm wondering whether we've looked into a right to shelter policy. And I'm not saying we should do it. I just want to clarify that we know it's costly. And there are it has to be designed very, very carefully. But I sort of think of, go to New York, and they got very high housing costs. They don't have a ton of unsheltered homelessness, and they don't have as much of the crime associated with that. Whereas compared to San Francisco, where they don't have these right to shelter policies. And again, I have not studied this, but has CAN looked at a right to shelter policy?
Not that I'm aware of, at least not in this effort, but it may be happening. I know there's a lot of work being done on sanctioned camping, so that's a really great suggestion. We'll take a look into that more, and we can report back on that.
Yeah, I just want to iterate that I'm not sure this is good policy, and one wants to be very careful to get the incentives right so that you're not giving out excessive hotel rooms and maybe getting people who aren't truly unsheltered to mimic those that are unsheltered. But I just wonder whether we might save on some of our policing costs, our negative externalities for the business, which we are very sympathetic for if we had such a policy. So anyway, I just want to not say I'm for sure endorsing this, but might be worth considering.
Yeah, no, thank you for that feedback. That's really good. We'll certainly look into that and pass that along to the homeless team.
All right, I'll jump in here real quick. I love that you guys have item 1E out of all of this. That's my favorite one. Help tenants become homeowners. I'm the beneficiary of one of those programs. I've shared that before as a poor college student. Great program, $500 down payment, and I had a house at age 22, 23 years old. And it's the shared equity program with the city. I'm super in favor of that type of help. You did make a comment, though, about people in the neighborhood not wanting to see the neighborhood change. Being in my neighborhood for 15 years, I can speak that that's not quite the case. We're actually happy when we see a change. We're happy when we see homeowners. We're happy when we see fewer crime. We're happy when we see people not living under tents and defecating on our front lawns, which does happen where we live. So we want to focus on homeownership because it was explained to me in this building 15 years ago when I bought my house that the reason why the city was pushing that initiative was that I would take pride in the neighborhood. I would volunteer in city functions similar to this and help change the neighborhood. Not saying that renters and tenants can't do it, but it's proven that more often than not, homeowners seem to impact for good more. So I would like to see a ton of focus put into that. I also saw that that one has the most dollar signs next to it, so I know it has a high cost to the city, but I think that's phenomenal. If you're really wanting to enact change that's gonna last generations, I don't see anything better than homeownership.
Yeah, and I literally, right before this, was on a call with Cameron Deal from the Utah League of Cities and Towns. President Adams ran a bill this session that allocated $50 million for first-time home buyers and for new construction. And so we are working on being able to use that money here in Salt Lake City and building upon that momentum that we have for that $50 million to be able to create new homeownership opportunities within the city. So absolutely agree. It's a priority of the mayor and of the city council and of the RDA board. So thank you for those comments.
Have you guys looked at identifying any potential city-owned properties that could potentially be developed as non-market housing or other types of affordable or deeply affordable housing? I'm currently working on a few projects in other cities as our architecture office that are kind of those types of projects where you partner with the city and a developer and you develop housing specifically for workforce, which kind of fills some of those gaps in transitional housing and eases some of that risk of rent going up, people losing their homes because of that and those types of things. But
Yeah, so that's also a priority of Mayor Mendenhall is to look at our city-owned parcels and where we can partner with developers to create workforce housing and affordable housing. And we do have an inventory of those properties, and I know there's work being done within community and neighborhoods in partnership with the RDA on looking at those parcels and what we can put out for bid for those types of projects. So yeah, thank you for that.
yeah.
I was planning a vacation, so I was on Airbnb, and they kept telling me how many houses in Salt Lake City are on Airbnb. So that item 3B, to make ADUs easier and less expensive to build, I think we should think about all of the ADUs or like full-on family homes that are used in short-term rentals, like enforcing our rules about that so that those are used for something else, for long-term housing instead of short-term rentals. We know that's a big number, and the neighborhoods, when they come here and talk about ADUs, it's always don't turn it into a Airbnb. So if that's part of that consideration, I mean, those houses, those 1,500 ADUs are already built. Maybe they're not ADUs, maybe they're whole houses, but they're already built. They're out there housing tourists instead of the hotels housing tourists.
Yeah, and thank you. Short-term rentals are definitely an issue within the city. We're looking at this legislative session, a bill to help us regulate those more. The Representative Messelman ended up pulling that bill because we couldn't get to consensus with the tourism industry, but it's definitely something we want to look at more here within the city. There's one of the policy priorities on the other side is looking at how we can regulate short-term rentals more within the city. And the recent ADU ordinance that passed had 2 additional FTEs added to code enforcement so that we can ramp up those code enforcement issues. Right now, our staff doesn't have the ability. They can only enforce on a complaint basis, and we're doing about 75 of those a year. So I think your point is very well taken, that we do need to look at how we can regulate short-term rentals more. We have some preemption at the state level there that doesn't allow for cities to be able to use online listings as the sole source of evidence for a short-term rental enforcement. So if we wanted to just go and scrub like VRBO, for example, and say, okay, we have these 20 short-term rentals, we're going to go and drop an enforcement on them. We can't do that. We don't have that enforcement capability. But if a neighbor calls and says, I know that my neighbor's renting this out, we send enforcement over, they start tracking that property, we can use the listing as one of the pieces of evidence. So,
Well, I know that they recently changed the rule since it's not a conditional use to have yes. It's not a conditional use anymore to have an in-home ADU. So I don't know if, most of those that are like rent a room in my house are probably not actual ADUs, but you can just use the listing, I think, to look for those kinds of properties. I think the listing is enough to act on those, I thought.
we can't, unfortunately. That was what we were trying to change at the state level this year. We were trying to get, it's called the not well language. We were trying to get that revoked so that we could use that or at least clarify that. And unfortunately, that did not pass. Yeah, I know. But you have a good point about those rooms, and it's certainly something that we need to look into more of what other tools that we have here within the city.
So I have a question about sort of the whole thing, which is that it's pretty general in terms of there's not really any, we don't even have numbers that suggest how many people have been displaced. And I looked through the reports that go back into the reports that go back on the reports, and there's no numbers in those either. And what we do have is reports from 2019, which do not take into account the problems that might have arisen from the pandemic and from other issues like that. So we actually don't have a very good idea of the scale of the problem right now. I mean, we have a little bit of an idea, but we don't have even a big range of what the scale of the problem is. And we also don't have in this report that I can see anyway, any set of numerical goals that would say, okay, we're going to acquire and rehabilitate unsubsidized housing, for example. We don't have a goal that says we're going to do 2,000 units. I mean, without having a sense of the scale of the problem and a sense of the scale of the solution, we're just putting some generalities out right now, which is fine for policy, but I don't think it's fine for goals. So if we're going to have a 2-year action plan, and certainly should have some numerical kind of goals associated with it, even if it's a range. I mean, if we say, I remember many years ago, we had a shortage of 8,000 housing units or something like that we said in the city, which probably is ridiculous, but maybe it's way more than that, maybe it's way less, I don't know. But if we say we're going to provide 8,000 housing units, then at least we know that that's where the goal is, where we need to aim. And I don't see that kind of goal reflected in either the 2-year action plan or in what I would call, a more general policy plan here. So I don't know if that's deliberate, so we don't fail, or or we just don't know yet what that might be. We haven't done the studies that show can't at this point do the studies that show the anti-displacement. So I would like just to know sort of what the plan is to move forward without having specific goals like that.
Yeah, that's really good feedback. Thank you. So this initiative really dovetailed pretty closely with Housing SLC, which just passed the City Council last night. So Housing SLC has quantifiable goals within it that tie to this. So a lot of the policies within here overlap with Housing SLC. So we have specific goals in there of creating I want to say it was 10,000 new units. Don't hold me to that number because I'm going off of my memory. Don't have that at the front. I'm caveating that. So we did, it was interesting because we had to update our moderate income housing plan at the same time as we were doing this. And we really focused the engagement on Thriving in Place and kind of backing up the engagement of Housing SLC. And so the intention is for Thriving in Place to be an appendix, to be a portion of Housing SLC. So Housing SLC, the goals outlined within there will support the policy statements within here. But you make a really good point that we probably haven't articulated that the way that we, as clearly as we should, and that maybe we want to look at some more quantifiable numbers here.
Well,
Were you going to say something, Nick?
I appreciate that the Housing SLC has those kinds of numbers in it, but I found going back into the real numbers very informative. For example, how many units are actually have been approved for the city already, or and how many are sort of under construction at this point, and understanding how that increase in supply, which is substantial, really substantial, would really affect this displacement policy. I mean, it just seems that this is really soft, and in order to really solve a problem, in my experience, you really need a much more definitive set of policies that address the actual scale of the problem. So if the 14,000 units that are under construction, or whatever it is, I can't remember exact numbers, but something like 14,000 units under construction right now, is that going to, and I know they're not affordable, but every bit helps, helps to solve part of the housing problem of housing people. Is the fact that most of them or all of them are basically rentals an issue with trying to do the housing, moving people from being tenants to being owners? I mean, that's another issue, which I don't see really reflected here either. So there's, I just think that this is a kind of, at this point, I appreciate that the Housing SLC does some of that, and it does do some of that. I would rather see these things melded more directly with each other.
Thank you. Nick, were you going to ask me?
The one piece I was going to add to that is pretty significant is you are right. There's a lot of data that we don't know. And one of the things that we've been working on is through this Thriving in Place project is to identify at what touch points can we start collecting some of that data and making it useful. It's one thing to have it, it's another to turn it into information that we can use to make decisions on. And that's a significant effort, not only of this, but of other things that we have going on in the city. So I think, while this may not specifically identify that, you'll start seeing that in some of the proposals that come forward with this, that there's a data collection piece with hopefully every application, at least that comes before the Planning Commission, about what's there, who's there, what happens to them, kind of thing. So that's all factored into the decision making. But more importantly, we have very localized data that we can start to utilize to see how those trends are changing and what they're meaning, and analyze those to determine if our policies are working or not.
Tell me again what the current and short-term funding potential is for this project.
I'm not sure if I understand.
Is it all city and state money that is currently anticipated for program development that goes on here?
Yeah, so it would be probably a combination of both city funds, potentially general fund, potentially funding our future, our annual housing and urban development grant allocation that we get. There's been quite an investment at the state level, as I've mentioned, of just $50 million for first-time home buyers. We got $55 million this session for deeply affordable, permanent supportive housing, $12 million ongoing for homelessness. So we've been seeing quite a bit of investment at the state level as well. So I think it will kind of span a host of different funding sources. What we funded last night through through the mayor's recommended budget. I think I'd have to look, and I'd be happy to get back to you on this, but I believe those both came out of Funding Our Future. And it was a $180,000 out of Funding Our Future for the tenant relocation assistance, and sorry, I'm muddling the numbers. I'd have to look them up, and I'd be happy to provide that information to you guys. And then there was also some dormant housing and urban development money that we put some of that towards tenant relocation assistance. And then lastly, we certainly have the Redevelopment Association, the RDA's funding availability that they put out to each area as well.
And does HUD have new money for this? I read something recently about a program, $81 million that HUD has for a program called YIMBY, that's Yes in My Backyard.
Yeah, so that was funded, I believe, and we are waiting for the guidelines to come out on that. It's supposed to be around August or September is what we're hearing, both from HUD and from our lobbyists in DC. So we're watching that funding really closely. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, certainly to implement some of Thriving in Place and do some code work as well. So we're watching that funding very closely.
Since you seem to have more influence with the state legislature on housing policy, and you brought up this $50 million multiple times, I actually think that was terrible legislation, and I think it's mostly going to developers' pockets, that money, because without a big increase in housing supply, if you just think about the elasticity, it's mostly reflected in house prices, and it was product they mostly they needed to sell. What I would have liked to see is an incentive for moderate-sized housing. If the problem is we have not enough housing, particularly for owner occupancy, because this was for owner occupancy, right? This was all going to owner occupancy. Mm-hmm. I would have liked to see we will provide X amount of subsidy for new construction of homes under 1,800 square feet or under 2,000 square feet. So I please don't encourage them to do this again.
Well, for what it's worth, none of us knew about that bill until it was in committee. But we're super grateful for $50 million because that's a great investment from the state. And I can tell you that there's a lot of conversations about a second bite of that apple because the development community is having a really hard time using that money because it doesn't, there aren't many places where you can build a new construction for $450,000. So we are looking at things like minimum lot sizes and setbacks, and that was the conversation I had just before this. So again, I think at the state level, it's refreshing to see us having a conversation about housing and getting some money and investment there. So
yeah, I mean, one way if the developers are saying I can't get zoning to build this, I mean, one sort of incentive might be some incentive for cities to zone for smaller size lots or something, if that's the problem. I don't know. I haven't worked out the details of exactly how you do that, but it'd be nice to sort of see some incentive for cities to kind of get the money who do make it a little easier to build this type of housing.
Yeah, I agree. And certainly infill Wasatch Front cities, we definitely want to be able to leverage that money in Salt Lake. And so we're having those conversations here. It's an item before the Commission on Housing Affordability as well. So point well taken there.
I do want to go back to Commissioner Gant's very first comment about perhaps not making a policy that's going to attract a lot of people here, kind of leave the doors wide open. I have been listening and talking to people that are here and that are unhoused in our city. And one thing that seems to be a reoccurring topic is that they're not from Salt Lake City. Oftentimes they may not even be from Utah. And I don't know how we make a policy that's not just going to open the doors wide open. And some people say, hey, Levi, you're not from here, which I'm not. And I'm glad that I came in here. I was able to add to the city, graduate from Highland High, University of Utah, all that's fun Salt Lake City stuff. But there are real issues, guys, that come when we let anyone and everyone come in. And I do have to share this. If you guys haven't followed on the news, maybe 6 weeks ago, right by my house, I was driving home from work on 1700 South. I live in Glendale. There were folks playing soccer. But at the same time, there was a gentleman that came from Texas running away after being wanted for the police in Texas for killing his neighbor that ended up in Glendale. and he was having some beer, and he thought someone stole $20 from him. So he reached into his truck, pulled out his AR-15, shot a soccer player, shot another gentleman that was there. This so happens to be the same park my children play at. So I just want to call it out that as we provide policies, I've heard from people saying, go to Utah, there's help. We need to figure out a way to help the people that are not going to do things that are going to be egregious to our neighborhoods. Don't know the solution to that. I do feel that needs to be called out, though.
Thank you. Any other comments, feedback for us? This has been super helpful. We really appreciate your guys' time throughout this process.
Will you tell us who you are again?
I'm Angela Price. I'm a policy director in community and neighborhoods. Again, really appreciate your guys' time. Feel free to reach out to me or Suze if you have any questions, if there's anything you want us to follow up on. I will get those budget numbers and send those to planning staff to share with you. I apologize, I don't have them my memory's not fabulous. There's too much floating around in there, so my apologies. And there was some last minute changes to the budget as well, so I don't quite know where everything landed yesterday afternoon, but happy to get that information to you and anything else that you guys need. So thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. Okay, now we get Nick for policies and procedures.
I will be pretty short. So this is a follow-up to some, which you all are aware of, but particularly at the last meeting, but we have seen an increase in the number of applicants who are requesting to postpone their items really close to the date, sometimes the date of the meeting. And as those that were at the last planning commission, it created a lot of confusion. And so we wanted to establish a policy so that we can be consistent with what we are telling applicants when they make these requests, because we think that's fair. And the memo I put together that's in your Dropbox talks about all of those things. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to talk about the actual proposal that we put in there. So basically, to summarize it, if requests are made more than 7 days prior to a public hearing, so the agenda's already gone out, we'll deal with that at the staff level. We'll honor that, we'll let them postpone it. That gives us enough time to send a notice out to people who may have planned on attending but couldn't otherwise be made aware prior to, and so that they're not wasting their time coming down to the meeting. If it's within 7 days, we're proposing that the item stay on at least for the public hearing, and that the item just be tabled at the end of that public hearing. Particularly like the last item where we had an applicant who wanted to redesign their project, which makes some of that irrelevant at that point if they're going to go back and redo something. And then we had another petition or application where the applicant wanted to meet with the neighbors to try to work out some solutions to some of the issues. Those all seem like legitimate reasons to postpone and let someone go work that out before
Do you want to keep the public hearing open, or do you want to close it on those?
Those would be left open.
Open, okay.
Yeah. We did add something that is kind of a catch-all because we recognize that there are emergencies that happen and people can't be there. We have, unfortunately, for example, several years ago, we had an applicant who had a death in the family, like the day of the meeting. The last thing that we'd want to do is add to any stress or grief, acknowledge those kinds of things happen. And so that's what this policy does, is it helps add some direction and some consistency and some transparency to how we make decisions about our agendas. That's all I have.
I have some feedback for the consent agenda procedure. I have some feedback for the consent agenda policy, if you want to hear it.
I would like to focus on this because I am not prepared to, I don't have the consent agenda policy in front of me.
Okay.
And so, if that's okay.
I guess my only question is if it's something that we know, like the redesign was kind of the one that made was the trickiest one because it was kind of a waste of time to go through all that when we knew that that wasn't even their proposal, whereas the other one was more like, we want feedback, so let's get the feedback now and go talk to them. Is there any judgment call on that, like where you table it because you know that everything we're talking about isn't relevant?
Well, I think the problem with doing it within that 7 days is that we have no way of telling the public that.
Right.
Right? And so people may, even if we mailed something out, they may not get it. They may show up. They spent the time to come down to try to participate, and then suddenly, oh, sorry, it's been postponed.
Yeah.
So we at least want to hear what they have to say.
Okay.
Even if because that also might be useful to those applicants to hear those issues, because they might be able to consider that in any changes that they may be making.
I was just curious about the threshold of how different the project would become. So.
And that's why we landed on 7 days.
Gotcha.
So that we could get some sort of mailed notice out that's more than likely going to get there.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Mr. Norris, I just wanted to reiterate. So I think in both cases last week, at least, it seemed to be a problem. They were reacting to public comments received with the staff report. And so I think I don't know what happened that they didn't they weren't aware they were going to get public comments. I don't know. So if staff could just reiterate the value of an applicant seeking feedback from everybody that's going to get notified as soon as possible, so they're not blindsided when it shows up in a staff report. Because I think that's what happened. And yeah, I think it'd be valuable to reiterate that to applicants that you're going to get public feedback, and it's better for you to hear it before it shows up in our folder, so you're prepared.
Will do. Thank you.
Having chaired the meeting that prompted these changes, I definitely welcome them.
Well, I will say that wasn't the meeting that necessarily prompted them. We have had a number of requests, and you'll see almost every agenda becomes an amendment because somebody has pulled off. And it's almost always because they've decided that, you know what, we're not quite ready to get in front of everybody and ask for a decision. And so the sooner they can let us know that, the more fair and better off it is to everybody else. The one thing I didn't get into that's in the memo is that when that happens, it does have a significant impact on other applicants. And that's something that we think is something that we need to get a handle on, because it is only fair if somebody is like, hey, I'm not going to be ready, and it's even the day that we're supposed to get that agenda out, sometimes we can scramble and replace them on the agenda with something else so that we don't have created this backlog, and that's one of the things that we're trying to somehow figure out. I mean, we've loaded up planning commission agendas before, and you've all seen those, especially the last three, to try to break that backlog, but it keeps piling up every time we do that. And so we want to be more fair and more deliberate with applicants so that they know what to expect. Everyone knows what to expect. And then we'll do this. We'll look at other ways too to help address that. But it's a growing issue. It wasn't just that meeting.
Does this require a motion?
It does, because you have to adopt the policies and procedures.
One last question. Would it make sense to put something like that on the consent agenda so people could still comment, but we wouldn't have to do the full presentation if they're going to come back and present it again anyway?
We could look at that. I don't necessarily know that we need to have...
I was just thinking about the time, because then you could still add something else to our agenda without it being impacted.
I think that's actually a great point. I don't know that we need to modify the policies and procedures to do that. I think that we can say if someone's postponed it, we're going to put you on consent, which means there's going to be a public hearing.
Yeah. So I think that's less time for sure. So.
With the recommendation, we'd have to be careful how we word the recommendation on the consent agenda if something's on there to postpone, but we can work on that and figure it out.
One other question, which is that, we did have a very long meeting last time, and I think these agendas that are sort of loaded up, as you said, are quite difficult. Is there, at the current time, we just go until we've done everything on the agenda. And is there such a thing as postponing an item while it's, that has a public hearing. I mean, we could have postponed Thriving in Place, for example, I think, as a briefing, or this as a briefing, without incurring too much public anything. But, I mean, not maybe the consultant wouldn't be so happy, but, I think, is there such a thing as actually saying, look, it's 9:30 and, the public is impatient, we're impatient, we just need to be out of here. And I don't know if that's a possibility.
Yeah, so your policies and procedures do allow there's a section in there about suspension of the rules. So you could potentially say, hey, look, we're not going to get out. Anything after X amount of time is not going to be given its, we're not going to be able to focus on it the way that we would if it were at 6 o'clock on the agenda or something like that. So you could, I think there's probably some ways within the policies and procedures that you could actually do that. There's also one thing that we are trying to do is give our best estimate about how long something will take when we finalize the agendas. Sometimes we hit it, sometimes we don't. Just to be honest, I think like the alley item on the first agenda that went almost 50 minutes tonight was a lot longer than we thought it was going to be. And I think we all probably would agree with that, but clearly it warranted more time than what we thought. So I think, we can work on trying to figure out better timings and things like that, but that might be a good way to deal with it.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate, this has been a big concern of mine, is the uncertainty. Like, if I knew it went till 9, but oftentimes it may amaze people, but I have things the next morning, and I actually need 8 to 9 hours of sleep. And I also think it affects who's able to serve as a planning commissioner, because I look around and this city's more than 50% renter. Do we have a single renter on the planning commission? I think those people have jobs and they can't serve because of this uncertainty around this. And I guess that's part of why I was asking Mr. Nielsen if there are any items that don't necessarily require a public hearing, but it sounds like by state law, every single administrative item requires a public hearing?
No, so
we can talk after.
Okay, got it.
And just for the record, I am a renter in Salt Lake City.
Awesome.
Property I own is up in the mountains, so.
Fantastic.
Well, since it looks like this is drawing to a close, I will make a motion that the commission adopt the modification to the policies and procedures related to requests to postpone an agenda item.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Christensen and a second by Commissioner Gale. Commissioner Lee?
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira?
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle?
Yes.
Commissioner Shearer?
Yes.
Commissioner Paredes?
As my last vote as a planning commissioner, I will vote yes.
Oh. Good job.
Commissioner Gent?
Yes.
Commissioner Christensen?
Yes.
Commissioner Burrows?
Yes.
Commissioner Gale?
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes.
Thank you. And Andres, we will be finding a way to recognize your 8 years on the Planning Commission. So thank you for your time and dedication and commitment to the city.
Thank you. If I can just a few words of my appreciation for the commission and for you as well as staff. We call you, our supporters. You're incredibly valuable to the city and the growth that we have here right now. Salt Lake City is growing. I've been here for 8 years, and I can tell you it's just a dramatic growth. It's almost unbelievable. It'll continue to grow. And just with that comes growing pains. Just stick it out there and do what's best for the city. Will be my parting, I guess, few words of wisdom. One thing that I wish I would have been more brave to help bring back, but that I missed and I think was quite essential back when I was, learning the ropes also, is the tours. I still remember going to the Northwest Quadrant back in the day and visiting those sites to see a visual. I know after COVID, things changed dramatically. That's one thing that I think would have definitely helped bring back, especially after COVID. I don't know what the situations are now, but they helped me as far as making decisions on these cases. But you guys are awesome. I thank you for your work as well, and your commitment and your desire to serve a city, a great city. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.